friends. Welcome once again to the Habitus. Follow us at habituspod, and welcome to another edition of our ongoing series, The Journeymen, in which we look at critically overlooked, let's say, careers of a single director and go through chronologically of all of the features that they've made. Today's episode is John Singleton, whose debut feature in 1991 was Boyz N the Hood, for which Singleton himself was nominated for Best Director, the first black director to be nominated for Best Director, and also the youngest ever.
Now, if you want to talk about guns, why is it that there's a gun shop on almost every corner in this community?
Why?
Tell you why. For the same reason that there's a liquor store on almost every corner in the black community. Why? They want us to kill ourselves. You go out to Beverly Hills, you don't see that shit. But they want us to kill ourselves. Yeah, the best way you can destroy a people, you take away their ability to reproduce themselves.
Yeah.
Who is it that's dying out here on these streets every night? Y'all.
Yeah.
Young brothers like yourselves.
What am I supposed to do? Fool roll up, try to smoke me? I'm gonna shoot the motherfucker if he don't kill me first.
You're doing exactly what they want you to do. You have to think, young brother, about your future.
Bobby, you've seen Boyz N the Hood, of course, many times, I believe.
Yeah, it was a film that I was very drawn to when I was a teenager because of my love for gangster rap at that age.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these 90s hood films were films that I actively sought out. Like I saw every film that Ice Cube was ever in. Boyz N the Hood is his debut in a role that was specifically written for him. What's your history with this one?
My history with this one is that I bought it on VHS back when I would buy 2 VHS tapes a week in HMV in the 2 for £10 sale, and watched it. Let's say a dutiful watch, because it was known, as a sort of a groundbreaking film in many ways. And so it was, it was a film that was very much part of the canon that you had to kind of go through as a teenage cinephile. And I liked it very much. And then for whatever reason, probably because I stored my VHS tapes away at some point, never revisited it. And so in preparation for this episode, watched it again only for the second time. And it's a very strong film in many ways. I was surprised actually by, okay, it's a drama, but I was surprised by how sort of plotless it is in terms of its kind of structural development. So it centers around 3 main characters, 2 brothers, Ricky and Darren, and their good friend Trey, played by, in this film, Cuba Gooding Jr. I should say Ricky at this point is played by Morris Chestnut. Again, I like how different all of the 3 performances are, and the characters are very well drawn. And playing Trey's father, Furious, is Larry Fishburne, who I think brings to this film a certain gravitas and experience that plays well against the newcomers.
Right. In a role that Eddie Murphy was considered for.
Yeah, which is very strange to learn, right? When you watch this film.
Hard to imagine, yeah.
Yeah, it is very hard to imagine, because Fishburne has this, let's say, dramatic seriousness.
Intensity.
Intensity. Yeah. That Murphy naturally sort of riffs against.
Right, yeah.
But would you agree that this film is surprisingly plotless, which is meant to be a sort of a neutral observation rather than a criticism?
Right, yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it's sort of semi-autobiographical. The Trey character, the Cuba Gooding Jr. character, is loosely based on Singleton's own experiences, and the events of the film are inspired by or based on his own experiences or the experiences of people that he knew or knew of when he was growing up in the 80s in South Central. Yeah, I mean, it sort of feels like it proceeds from, rather than plot, or even to a certain extent rather than character, it proceeds from the basis of social issues.
Yeah.
And it's the most important thing is to get all of these issues into the film and find a place for them in the drama.
Yeah.
In the dramatic construction. which is why you have the three characters kind of representing three very different types of young black men.
Yeah.
In this place and time. You have the one who is drawn into the gang culture, and the other who is like the athlete who maybe can ride that athletic ability into a college scholarship. And they're the brothers, and they're kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum. And Trey is more like a kind of an observer of this.
Yeah, very much so. Which is, I mean, it begins with the three young boys as young boys, like as pals. At the end of which, Darren Doughboy is arrested and gets sent away to juvenile prison. We could imagine, and then flash forward to some years later, in which the characters are played by the adults, and it's Darren Ice Cube's welcome home party, and I think that's the point at which we realise that this is going to be a film that kind of unfolds from the perspective of Trey, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character, and not only social issues, I would agree with you, but not only social issues, but place-specific social issues that are very, very embedded within that South Central Los Angeles community. Like, for instance, like it's ubiquitous on the soundtrack. This police helicopter, right? Like,
right.
that we hear like throughout almost most scenes, which I think helps to ground its script-based, not contrivances, but like, for instance, like, they got the two brothers, one with kind of social and career prospects, the other one very much without, which isn't so extraordinary, and it's underscored by that scene in which Ricky is visited by a professor from a college that he may or may not be attending in the future.
Even rooted in the fact that it is Darren who goes to juvenile detention. So it's like it establishes this like early life event or choice or proclivity that ultimately kind of sets him on a particular course that diverges from his brother.
Yeah, so there's a causal logic there that is rooted in American institutions and the ways in which American capitalism is founded upon racial division.
Right, and also rooted in American cinema in the overt reference in the opening sequence to Stand By Me.
Right.
The kids looking for the dead body. And then also, which is called back in the final scene where Darren Doughboy Ice Cube fades away because Trey narrates, doesn't he? The final scene.
No, I think it's on-screen inscriptions that tell us where they went.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's almost like a response to that. It's like Stand By Me was 1986, so it's like this is like Stand By Me is like the kind of working to middle class white nostalgia trip to the 50s.
Yeah.
And this is like John Singleton's response to that.
Yeah,
These
very
are the
much
lives
so.
of young inner city black kids.
Yeah, and it feels autobiographical as well, and I think he wrote the script when he was 20 years old, which might account for, again, not necessarily a criticism here, or not even a criticism at all, in fact, which might account for the fact that it is kind of it drifts from one scenario to the next, and it's not until sort of the final 20 to 30 minutes that the preceding scenes kind of have some sort of causal function in terms of what it's leading to, and the tragedy that it ends with it doesn't come from nowhere. It's very much there in the concept of the film and the premise.
In retrospect, it's very kind of signposted.
Yeah. So this film can obviously be spoken about in a certain lineage, let's say, with regard to black cinema and the emergence of black new cinema, if we might use that term, in the 1990s and towards the end of the 80s. And towards the end of the 1980s. But this came on the back of Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, and I think was kind of greenlit in production terms on the strength of that film. But it's also a very
Right,
different one, right, in feel. It feels like Singleton's,
Mm-hmm.
if he is inspired by Lee's film, and I think he very much was, he's very much doing his own thing as well.
Right. Yeah, it's much more social realist than Lee's. It's much less stylized.
Less aggressive.
Uh,
Would you say?
less aggressive, yeah, and more sort of tragic in tone, I think. But yeah, I mean, like these are the filmmakers who, you know, they grew up on blaxploitation cinema of the 70s, but then kind of, because they're a younger generation, they married that with you know, hip hop culture and gangster rap in particular. So you have like the early 90s films, which are a lot more sort of rooted in that kind of like milieu of like films like Juice and Menace to Society, which are both more. I mean, Juice is more like a thriller, and Menace to Society is a lot more sort of nihilistic and much more, much darker than Boyz N the Hood. Boyz N the Hood is much more sort of balanced, almost kind of, as I said, more of a sort of a social realist kind of approach.
Yeah, which I do find, and we'll get to this, I do find works both for and against Singleton's approach to different films as he has his career developed.
Yeah, we'll get back to his more sort of explicit return to blaxploitation subject matter later.
Yeah.
In relation to Shaft.
One thing I do want to say is that Cuba Gooding Jr. was, I'd forgotten how good a performance this is from him. I'm thinking,
yeah, he's really good. Yeah.
I'm thinking particularly, I mean, in the scene in which he's introduced at Doughboy's welcome home party, you know, he has an immediate presence there, which is very likable, very laid back, very believable, you know, because Doughboy is very sort of believable in his own way, but less likable than Trey's. So
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, he's got a strength and a persona there that I really admire. That he really embodies well the performer. And that scene in which he's crying with his girlfriend, and you know,
the scene after he's terrorized by the racist black cop.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and he's like punching the air, and he's like letting out all this you know, kind of futile rage.
Yeah, which is I think the emotional sort of the most moving scene in the film, actually. That when the scene after he's terrorized by the cop, because it's a very affecting scene in which he is coming to terms with being confronted explicitly by something that conditions his whole life, right? Conditions the whole social fabric of his universe, and yet that's it. Like, that's the most brutal sort of confrontation he has of it, and he is completely impotent. You know, he is completely powerless in that scene, and he is held at gunpoint, and yeah, he just breaks down, and it's a really moving moment. Great performance.
Yeah.
So I have one question, and if the answer to it is no, don't tell me why. But do you think Boyz N the Hood remains John Singleton's best work?
Yes, but not by as wide a margin as I would have said prior to filling in the gaps in his filmography in preparation for this. I'm going to give it pride of place because of my long history with it.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I think ultimately it feels like his most successful in a way, and I don't just mean by that the fact that it is regarded by the critical consensus to be its best, but it just feels the most, in terms of from concept to execution and mapping its ambition against final delivery. I think it's his most sort of successful. But I do find that actually he has made more interesting films than this, and interesting for different reasons, which we'll come to.
Okay, so as we did on the Aronofsky episode, I'm going to, in between our discussion of each of these films, I'm going to briefly run through some of the projects that John Singleton was attached to or was developing, but that he ultimately did not make. I couldn't find any information on projects that he was attached to between or immediately in the wake of Boyz N the Hood. He seemed to go straight into his second film, which was also based on an original screenplay that he'd written, which was Poetic Justice.
Oh, so you one of them angry bitches, huh? A feminist.
What you call me?
Said you a mean bitch.
We gotta stop this right now. You don't know shit about me, okay? Don't be calling me no bitch. You don't know nothing about me.
Here I am acting all courteous and shit, trying to spark up a conversation. Nigga gotta call you a bitch to get your attention.
I'm a black woman, okay? I deserve respect. Don't be calling me no bitch.
Hey.
If I'm a bitch, your mama's a bitch.
Say that black woman shit, okay? You bleed once a month just like the rest of the hoes. And we ain't talking about my mama, we talking about your stuck-up ass. Scandalous ass bitch, thinking niggas supposed to do some fucking magic tricks for your ass.
Pull this shit over right now. Pull it over.
Where you finna go?
I'll walk, motherfucker.
Oh,
Pull this shit over.
Gob ass bitch. Get your shit. Get your shit out of your mouth. Talking all that shit. Walk your ass home. Scandalous ass motherfucker. Do them fucking fat ass stars some good anyway.
I bet not see your ass in LA, okay? I'm gonna get somebody to fuck you up, motherfucker. Fuck you.
Fuck you.
Fuck
bitch.
you.
What's
Fuck
going
you.
on?
They gon' fuck you up,
Fuck you,
motherfucker.
bitch.
Fuck you up.
Fuck you, bitch.
Fuck you.
Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you,
you.
bitch.
Motherfucker.
Fuck you, bitch.
So, had you seen Poetic Justice before we settled on this the topic of this episode?
No, I hadn't. I'd always known about this film, but I had never watched it. And in some ways, it's a strange film to follow up on from Boyz N the Hood. Had you seen it?
No, I had never seen
Okay.
it. Why had you never seen it?
I'm not sure, actually. I don't know.
I know why. I know why I had never seen it.
Why?
Because I thought it was a romantic comedy.
Uh-huh.
Which it kind of is. It kind of is, you know. So like the fact that Tupac was in it, wasn't enough to overcome for me, for my teenage self. The fact that it looked like romantic comedy starring Janet Jackson about a poet.
Yeah.
Which, you know, is what it is.
Yeah.
So, you know, I watched, you know, Boyz N the Hood, and I'd seen Higher Learning because of the presence of Ice Cube in that as well. But no, I never was drawn to the subject matter of Poetic Justice.
You didn't want your appreciation of Tupac tarnished by a genre that you despised. No, it's interesting that you called it a romantic comedy. I think there are romantic elements here. There are comical elements in it. You know, obviously it's brushing up against that, but I actually think it fits more comfortably into the tradition of road movies, right?
Yes.
Which obviously doesn't prohibit it from being amusing, let's say. But do you like the film?
That's right. Not really.
Okay.
No. I think Tupac is great in it.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think Janet Jackson is not good.
It's interesting because she got worst new star at that year's Raspberries.
Right.
But she also got best female performance at the MTV Awards.
Okay. Well.
I don't think.
What did you make of her?
I don't think she's. No, I don't have a problem with her actually. I found it's interesting because there are plausibly fleshed out female characters in Boyz N the Hood, but obviously the film itself centers around three male leads. Watching Poetic Justice straight after watching Boyz N the Hood a day before, it's kind of refreshing to see a follow up like this to be kind of structured around a female protagonist and to give you know, kind of as a sort of self-conscious response to one's own debut feature. It's you know, I was on its side from that point of view. I don't.
Do you think the title came first or the character?
Interesting question. Probably the title.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
So we should say that Janet Jackson plays a character named Justice, and her poetry.
Who is a poet.
Yeah, who was a poet, and the poems featured in the film are those of Maya Angelou. And Tupac plays a postman called Lucky. And they go on a road trip from South Central Los Angeles to Oakland. That's kind of the synopsis of the film, really. A long road trip with Justice's friend Aisha, played by Regina King, who returns from Boyz N the Hood, whose kind of on-off boyfriend Chicago is played by Joe Terry. And so there's a couple within this foursome, and then this kind of central comic tension of the film is that between Justice and Lucky, who have this kind of begrudging attraction to one another. Because in the first scene in the film, Justice's boyfriend, played by Q-Tip, is murdered.
Right. Yeah.
And for me, the weak point of the film is that the character played by Q-Tip, his death, it never really feels like consequential for Justice.
Yeah.
It never really feels like a thing that she has to kind of overcome. I get that she has to overcome trust issues and learning how to love again, but the tragedy that she feels as a result of his death never really works its way into the film.
In a convincing way. No, I agree. Yeah, I found that right from the opening scene is the murder at a drive-in. A drive-in movie theater.
A movie in which they're watching a movie with a bald Billy Zane.
Right. Yeah.
It's a very, very funny beginning to the film.
So they're watching a sort of B-movie sort of sex melodrama.
Yeah.
A sort of spoof called Deadly Diva.
Yeah.
Starring Billy Zane and Laurie Petty playing versions of themselves.
Yeah.
Which is actually the film actually opens in that film.
Yes, it's a great it's a great opening for a second feature after Boyz N the Hood, because I went into it and I obviously one could work out that it's not the film that we're going to watch, but I didn't actually, and I thought, oh, okay, Billy Zane's in this film. Keanu Reeves is also in Poetic Justice, not in Deadly Diva. Apparently he's not credited, but he plays a homeless person.
Oh really?
Yeah, apparently.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, continue with
Ice Cube was offered the role of Lucky.
Yeah.
But turned it down because he didn't want to play a romantic character.
Yeah, or
at that point
he didn't.
Career, so
it's not that he didn't want to; he didn't feel equipped to. I think.
Oh really? I'd say it was probably a bit of both, though.
Can you imagine Ice Cube
his public image?
Yeah.
No, but if he had been in it, I probably would have watched it as a teenager. So like most road movies, the plot and the structure is episodic. We and as in the case of most episodic stories, it's uneven.
Yeah.
What would you say is the best episode in the film?
The best episode, I mean, potentially when they arrive at the sort of barbecue / party.
Definitely, yeah, me too. The family barbecue, where they pretend to be like distant cousins. Yeah. That's the funniest scene, and I think the film is by far at its best when it's being funny. I think the as I said, I'm not convinced by Janet Jackson's performance. I think Tupac is really, really good, playing at every point in his emotional range.
Yeah.
I think he's really funny. I think his anger and his everything is really, really strong.
Yeah, I agree.
But as he was in Juice as well, he had a lot of acting potential. I also really did you ever see Gang Related, which I think might have been one of his last films with Jim Belushi.
Right.
I always thought that was an underrated crime thriller. Anyway, a lot of the film's screen time is taken up with particularly Chicago and Aisha having these like blazing rows that I find very tiring to watch, because they're not played for laughs, really. They're not played for emotion, and they don't really until they ultimately do. they don't really have any dramatic consequences. It's just like bickering, but on a really amplified scale. And you know, when people are having an argument around you, it's just like a really uncomfortable thing to be present for, and I find it kind of exhausting and unappealing to sit through. And there is a lot of that in the film.
There's it's a very I mean the scene that we've just mentioned, the barbecue party thing, the family party, does feel like also the most Singleton as a director is most comfortable in that scene, because I do think it's also, you spoke about it being the funniest. I was going to say it's also the most sort of Singletonian of the many of the many scenes in this
Are
film.
we coining that term today?
That's it. You first heard it on the Habitus. In the fact that he incorporates humor on a naturalistic level into something that feels also inherently tense, because you know they've feigned their way into this party, and so there is sort of laughs to be had, but also there's tension there because you know they're kind of playing performances within it, and also because I think the action which catalyzes the end of that episode is another blazing row between Chicago and Aisha, and that I think is this sort of deliberately unpleasant undertone. Do you think that these deliberately unpleasant moments between Chicago and Aisha, though, are meant to function as a theme, not only like a thematic sort of counterbalance to what's happening with the chemistry between Justice and Lucky, but also as like as a serve a plot function in terms of bringing them together?
In terms of bringing Justice and Lucky together?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you know,
I'd say
what
so.
happened?
Yeah.
What happens to Chicago? Because you know, look, Lucky has his sort
They
of
leave him by the side of the road. Yeah.
Lucky has his kind of moment of maturity, and you know, hits him and abandons him, and we never see Chicago again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to say that the structure of not so much the structure, but the pacing of the character exposition is or the character development is really, really strange. Like it's 65 minutes into the film before we find out that Justice has some sort of troubled relationship with her mother.
Yeah.
And it's also in that same scene, it's at that point that we suddenly discover that Aisha has an alcohol problem, which never comes up again.
Right. Yeah.
So she pulls her aside. They're you know, I think it's shortly after the barbecue actually. Yeah. They've had their big blazing row in the back of the mail truck, and Justice pulls Aisha aside and says, you know, this is why I always, you know, this is why I never go out to, you know, I never go out with you. I never, you know, socialize with you because you're always behaving this way. And you know, you remind me of my mother. And then Aisha's like, oh my God, I'm sorry. And, you know, I didn't realize. Yeah. And then that has the alcohol thing with Aisha never comes up again. And then it's 82 minutes into the film when we discover that Justice's mother actually committed suicide. Yeah. You know, which is really, really strange because it doesn't. The introduction of those ideas doesn't really change your perspective on what you've watched up to that point. It just seems like extremely late in the day kind of character revelation.
It's true. It retroactively sort of explains why Justice's boss back at the hair salon first, you know, says, you know, I know I'm not your mother in the first scene, or very early on in the film, sorry, and it kind of, you know, changes, I suppose, our perspective on that chemistry and relationship. But other than that, yeah, I agree. It doesn't really factor into our understanding or kind of perspective on the rest of the film in any way.
Right, which you kind of need. I mean, like if you have a road movie like this, like road movies are typically some sort of like, you know, the metaphorical journey and often a kind of a coming of age story. Yeah. But you know, you don't have a plot as such. You have episodes, and what connects all of those episodes together is some kind of characterization rhythm, and direction, you know, whereas this feels very kind of arbitrary and very kind of like ill-timed and thrown together. I think it's a sloppy film with some standout moments, and I think Tupac is great in it.
Yeah.
So in June of 1993, 1 month before the release of Poetic Justice, Singleton was attached to direct a film called Burnout for Columbia, which was the story of an ex-government operative who, while trying to get back to living a normal life, is forced back into action.
Was that made?
No, that was never made.
Oh, okay.
But it's interesting to note that he was flirting with, straightforward genre material as early as 1993.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that never got made, and his next project was yet another original screenplay, Higher Learning.
How do you feel knowing that this country doesn't belong to you any longer? I mean, what do you think of that? How do you feel knowing that when you graduate from college, you might not be able to get a job because of the color of your fucking skin?
Because it's a fucking quota.
People don't realize how far down the drain America's gone. What do you think about that, Remy?
Guess I never thought about that, man. It's different here than I thought it was gonna be, you know? It seems like everybody's sticking to their own, taking up for their own. I don't know anybody down here. I don't know, it's different, man, you know? All I got is me.
No, man. And me. We're brothers by blood.
Yeah. You got me too, Remy.
Oh, I think I'm gonna cry. Hey, shut the fuck up over there, Narco. Show the man some respect, you know what I mean?
That's cool, Scott.
That ain't right. That's pure fucking Aryan blood you're talking to right there.
No, you're right. This is brotherhood, Remy. Welcome home.
Okay, so had you seen this film before preparing for this episode?
I hadn't, and as soon as I did, I felt, while I was watching it, and especially after, at that point, I watched them in chronological order, I felt, okay, I can imagine that this is the film that'll take probably the most time up to discuss on the podcast itself, because it feels, for me, it feels, now that I've seen all of them, it feels like Singleton's most ambitious film. I said earlier that I don't think he's made a better one than Boyz N the Hood. But I think Higher Learning certainly tries to attempt to do something that is conceptually more ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
His most ambitious film? Yes, I think so, yeah. I saw this when I was a teenager. I saw this on the basis of Ice Cube being in it again.
Yeah.
And I remember liking it. On a rewatch, I found it feels very timely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Particularly the Michael Rappaport storyline.
Yeah.
Like that's a story that could be told in a film today in pretty much exactly the same way.
Yeah, I agree. And Michael Rappaport's character, Remy, is one of three leading characters, let's say, in the film that arrive at the fictional, although aptly named, Columbus University. The other two is Malik Williams, played by Omar Epps, who originally I think was going to be played by Tupac.
Yeah, Tupac went to prison for sexual assault.
Yeah. And I can very much imagine Tupac in the role. Omar Epps is fine, but I can definitely imagine Tupac in the role after watching Poetic Justice. And the third character is Kristen Connor, played by Christy Swanson, who...
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Sorry?
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh yeah, that's right. A film that are waiting to be watched on my shelf. Yeah, I mean, I think so. Malik arrives at the university as he has a scholarship through his sporting ambitions and sporting talents. Although he's very much a lot more than that.
Right.
And Kristen is, another fresher who is sexually assaulted
Yeah,
at a
she's
fraternity
raped.
party.
She's raped at a party in a fraternity.
Yeah. And the kind of emotional fallout of which leads her to seek solace in a women's group, a survivors group.
Led by Jennifer Connelly,
yes.
who I hadn't seen this film since I was a teenager. So, I remembered Ice Cube, I remembered Omar Epps, and I remembered Tyra Banks, and Michael Rappaport and Lawrence Fishburne. But in the opening credits, the first name is Jennifer Connelly.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, wait,
yeah,
is Jennifer Connelly like the lead in this movie?
I know.
I had forgotten Christy Swanson. I couldn't remember who the lead, the female lead was. But no, she has a very small role.
Connelly does, yeah.
Yeah. But you can kind of think of this as a sort of a spiritual sequel to Boyz N the Hood, or like an alternate future where Ricky wasn't killed and went to college on an athletic scholarship, and as the Omar Epps character,
and telegraphed from the mean streets of South Central Los Angeles into this hodgepodge of different identities and constructs and intellectual challenges and institutional challenges. We do have an institutional figure here represented by Professor Morris Phipps, played by Lawrence Fishburne,
doing a pretty risible accent. Is it South African?
Yes. I mean, it's an interesting decision to have a character with that accent. And he is quoting the likes of Frederick Douglass and assigning Frederick Douglass to students like Malik.
And he's also peddling a very kind of one-dimensional kind of individualist like message to the students, that it's like they really have nobody to blame for their situations but themselves, and it's like a very extreme form of that kind of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of.
Absolutely. If you were to put the work in, you might be like me, or you might be in a position to.
Whereas we don't really know. We don't really know his background, do we?
No.
I don't think we ever get really any insight into where he comes from.
No.
Presumably South Africa, but what his class background is or anything like that. When I started watching this, I felt quite early on that I was going to enjoy it. That I felt it was kind of like a lot of the same sort of themes from Boyz N the Hood mixed with some other themes. You could argue that he takes on too much in it. That he tries to deal with racism and also sexism, and doesn't really fully integrate them. In fact, he has the opportunity to do that with the Tyra Banks character, but doesn't give her really anything to do, except to die at the end. But yeah, it's kind of like feels a bit like a genre mashup, kind of between something like Crash meets Animal House. It has all of the recognizable tropes of like the college movie. Even with some of the kind of the animal comedy kind of humor.
Yeah, I mean, he's expanded his canvas somewhat. I mean, it's the first film he's made which is over 2 hours, although he did go on to make longer films than this, and so it feels faster because of there's a larger ensemble of cast and story arcs to get through. But at the same time, there is still a certain shagginess to the narrative development. In this sort of meandering episodic manner in which we proceed through all of these different storylines, which, as you said, don't fully cohere.
No, it has almost feels like an anthology kind of feel when you're jumping between the different storylines. They don't even necessarily share characters in common. Like the circles that these three characters move in are separate. I mean, that's part of the theme, but it ultimately results in a feeling that you're watching kind of three very discretely separate stories. But I also think that like I do have a kind of a weakness for these kinds of ensemble, social milieu kind of films, where I would compare it to something like not a film but something like The Wire, where it's like it's about the city, you know, and this is about the college. This is about the institution, and these are figures within the institution, and we have this kind of prismatic perspective on the successes and failings and problems of the institution through these different lenses.
Yeah.
And I think in a way, you know, it's hard to make a really bad film in this vein, because for the same reason that people look back fondly on a TV series when they finish watching it, even though there were these dead spots, like you kind of remember the high points, because you're never stuck in one storyline long enough to be really put off by it. You know that in a few minutes you're going to cut back to this other storyline that maybe interests you more.
Sure. I mean, some of the early high points for me are the scenes involving Michael Rappaport, and I think it's a very good performance, particularly
it's a great performance.
Particularly before he's kind of approached by the on-campus Nazis. So I think it's a very, very good sort of rendition of somebody who is capable of being a jerk, but also like just a bit lonely and just a bit of a social outcast in a way. When he's at the fraternity party, for instance, trying to sort of ingratiate himself, and it's a bit cringy to watch, right?
Yeah, he's that is actually an early point where the stories do intersect. Yes. After the rape, he goes up to the guy who is kind of upset about what has just happened, and kind of congratulates him on like, you know, having scored with what is her name? Her name is Kirsten. But no, I agree. I think that the point at which he's approached by the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis, it feels like it makes a lot of sense. You know, it makes a lot of sense that this character, you know, we've kind of been driving in this direction, but the portrayal of this kind of angry loner.
This is what I was going to ask you, though.
As kind of raw potential for, you know,
his arc to the very vulnerable outskirts of this self-contained campus milieu is very well rendered. I was going to say, though, the scene in which he is sort of approached by Scott Moss, played by Cole Hauser, who pops up again in another Singleton film later on.
Yes, he does. Yeah. When I was watching that film, I was thinking, where did I see him? I watched him in the film yesterday.
So the scene in which he is approached by the neo-Nazis, they are sort of actively recruiting him into their ranks because they sense in him, firstly, visibly, he's kind of alone. Secondly, he obviously, like, you know, he's a bit of a down and out at that point. Did you feel the sort of plot contrivances ticking along there at some point, just grinding away a little bit? Like the fact that, you know, we all of a sudden see the black shiny boot coming into frame. Like, maybe might have been better had we seen those exist before him, you know, like, just rather than seeing Nazism as this kind of active recruitment process, something a bit more organic there, perhaps. I mean, it's obviously tricky to do that in the time frame that we have.
I mean, the neo-Nazis are not supposed to be enrolled at the college, though, because when he drops out, they you know, he gives him shit for dropping out and says that, you know, you're a race traitor if you drop out, you know, because we need more people, you know, like you in positions of power and all that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Now, you've mentioned Ice Cube as well there, like, as the main point of interest when you first watched it many years ago. I think this is a much more I think this is a much improved actor as well from 4 years previously. Like, because I forgot to say that in Boyz N the Hood, I do find him a little bit of a weak link in terms of the three main performances there. Like the one moment where he realizes Ricky's under threat, at the very end of the film. The one moment where, you know, he's kind of required to act, it feels a bit of above his talents, let's say. Whereas here, I find him extremely good.
Although he's not asked to carry anything quite as emotional as that in this film.
He's not. He's playing like a senior who's sort of
who's been there for apparently been there for 6 years. Yeah. He's kind of like a guru kind of character who he's absorbed all of the knowledge that the college can bestow to him, but I don't know. We're never really given a reason why he hasn't graduated.
Yeah, I know, because he's the most sort of like
he's obviously
audibly
intelligent enough to do
right?
that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's demonstrably bright, and he's the only character I feel from the main student ensemble, and arguably including even the professor, and in fact certainly including the professor, who comes close to sort of making any sense of their own sort of situation and their own position within that wider institutional framework. Almost like if we were to read a film in this way, if we were to be interested, I know we're not these days, but if we were to if if we wanted to read a film in terms of what Singleton might be saying, I think Singleton comes closest to the character of Fudge.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, he feels like a mouthpiece for the filmmaker. Yeah.
And
I mean, a lot of people
film,
criticize
sorry.
this film for being heavy-handed and didactic, and it absolutely is. But I don't know. I'm not hugely bothered by that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a film about, for me, not only about the experience of working within an educational institution like that, or being part of that. It's also a film about how those experiences find expression, and I think a lot of it is how it finds sort of verbal expression, or how that's dramatized, and so a lot of it is rooted in dialogue and those kinds of conversational exchanges, and so it does feel a little, at times, necessarily a little bit too verbal in its approach, let's say.
Yeah.
And one more thing I wanted to say about Ice Cube, just before we move on briefly, is that he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor in this film at the NAACP Image Awards that year, but lost out to his co-performer Lawrence Fishburne. I don't know how, because I find Ice Cube's performance a lot more sort of dramatically capable, in fact. But no, you mentioned Crash there, and I actually think this is a much better film about racial sort of division and social division than that film, than Paul Haggis's film. And I think a large part of that is because, although, okay, a lot of the tensions here are dramatized through dialogue and through conversation, and have to find expression in such a manner, there's no attempt here at an easy answer.
Right. I also think that it helps that the film has a real feeling of being about the institution.
Yes.
With those characters within the institution, whereas Haggis's film doesn't at any point feel like it's a film about Los Angeles. It just feels like it's a film about racism, and I think this has has much more of the sort of the prismatic, multifaceted perspective.
We could probably extend that comparison also to include Lawrence Kasdan's Grand Canyon, which is a film I actually haven't seen in many, many years, but remember
I've never seen that.
Being a little bit embarrassed by in its same kind of approach to those kinds of issues, because again, I don't think that limits itself in any way to a single sort of institution. But yeah, I mean, it feels like I would be very interested to know if Singleton had watched Altman's Nashville on the run up to this,
right?
Which is a similarly I mean, that's 3 hours long, so it's got another hour of drama to play with. But that's a similarly meandering, stylistically meandering as well, film that all of a sudden just seems to come to a head at the very end through a tragedy that in that film is a lot less foreseeable, whereas in this one, it's obviously going to be drawn to it towards that conclusion.
Okay, so in May of 1995, a few months after the release of Higher Learning, Singleton was attached to direct a film called Brushback, which was about an arrogant modern-day baseball star who gets hit in the head by an errant pitch and awakens to find himself in the Negro National League circa 1940.
And again, was that made?
Not to my knowledge. It sounds strangely familiar without the racial element to an episode of The X-Files where Mulder wakes up and he's a baseball player in the 40s or something.
Okay.
Anyway, so later that year he started work on his fourth film, Rosewood.
We won't talk, Sylvester. You get him out here right now. Mr. Walker,
My boy don't know nothing about this business.
You let him tell us that.
Let Jesse Hunter tell us something.
Yes, I know y'all. I was midwife to more than half of you, and some of your young'uns. I done seen you come up from babies to now. Ain't nothing gonna come of this. It don't make sense. My Sylvester ain't had nothing to do with this mess. We ain't never known no Jesse Hunter. I was there with Miss Fanny. I seen the man's face as plain as day. And most of you men know that that man was white.
Who fired that shot? You tell me right now. I told you no more shooting. Didn't I tell you that?
Look down. This time I'm coming home.
So this is another one that I hadn't seen before doing my homework for this episode, and I had always actually thought that it was I had always been aware of it in John Singleton's filmography, but I had never really looked into it, and I had always assumed that it was an antebellum slavery film. But it's actually not. It's set in the 1920s in Florida.
Yeah.
And it's about it's a lot of writing on it classifies it as a historical fiction, which I don't know, seems a little bit uncharitable.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I mean, it's a true story. You know, it's not Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. You know.
Yeah, it's a massacre of an actual black town in Florida, called Rosewood, which was destroyed
by the residents of the
by the
residents of the neighboring
town. Yeah.
It's maybe Sumner, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like this. I thought it was excellent, and you asked me if I still thought Boyz N the Hood was his best film. This would be the one that would challenge it, but as I say, I give it to Boyz N the Hood because I've known Boyz N the Hood for so long. But
yeah,
I thought Rosewood was really good.
That surprises me, actually. I didn't expect you to like this as much as you do. I liked it to a degree. It's his longest film. Like a lot of different sources listed as at least like 145 minutes. I don't know if I
version
saw
I watched was 142.
Yeah, mine too. But okay, so Ving Rhames as Man, and this is perhaps why I agree it's an uncharitable description. But this is perhaps why it's referred to as a fictional historical account. Because Man in the actual historical episode just didn't exist, but he plays here a property speculator who comes into town. He's an outsider into this black community.
An ex-soldier.
Yeah, he's a war veteran. And
of the First World War.
Yeah, and he befriends Sylvester Carrier, played by Don Cheadle, and his family. And in the process meets John White. Now, John White, played by John Voight, is the town's sole white inhabitant. I mean, and his family, sole white family.
Yeah.
And he's a shopkeeper. And I mean, it's quite a slow start, an atmospheric introduction to this town of Rosewood. And I think a large part of that is it's obviously a deliberate structural decision to have us spend time in something that by the end of the film will no longer exist. So it doesn't begin with, the accusation, the false accusation, the barefaced lie, in fact, by which a lynch mob forms in search of a black rapist who doesn't exist. That results in the death of this town. It's quite
sorry, just to put that in context.
Sorry.
the catalyst for the slaughter is a white woman in the town of Sumner, the neighboring town, who is sort of habitually cheating on her husband with people who are kind of passing through the town, not so much the town's residents, but seemingly people who are coming through. One of them beats her, and in order to explain her injuries, she decides to say that she was raped by a black man. And this fires up this what begins as an investigation very quickly becomes a lynch mob and so on, and then it escalates and escalates and escalates. But there is no such person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at one point late in the film, one or a couple of the members of that lynch mob do kind of admit that they had an inkling all along that this black rapist didn't exist, and that, you know, it's quite obvious that she had made it up. And yet,
because again, they already know that this is what she, like, it's not a secret that this is what she does.
Yeah.
You know,
but
she already has this reputation.
It is easier to resolve that problem of misogyny by filtering that into a racial, racial attack. I mean, they racialize the misogyny because it's easier to deal with than it is to confront. It is in house, let's say.
We said in relation to Higher Learning that the Ice Cube character kind of feels like a avatar for Singleton in the story. And I kind of feel Ving Rhames' character in this one, Man, feels that way as well. There's a scene where the scene of the first lynching, where Man has come. He's looking for somebody in that area, and he's hiding in the reeds beside the river. And it's almost, I don't know, I got a sense of like he pulls back the reeds like he would pull back a curtain to watch what's happening, and it's almost like John Singleton kind of like peering back into this story from the present.
Yeah, and not being able to do anything about it in the immediate
exactly,
sense.
But that also made me think of like the idea that, you know, when Quentin Tarantino made Inglourious Basterds, he described it as a Jewish revenge fantasy.
Yes.
I mean, Quentin Tarantino's not Jewish as far as I know, but you know, this very much feels like the introduction of the Man character. John Singleton is a big fan of Western films, and there's a lot of imagery in the film where he feels like the kind of the lone gunman, the man with no name, kind of passing through the town, who's gonna
I know what you mean.
come to the aid of the town. And I mean, I guess maybe a lot of people don't like that kind of thing. I think it's quite an interesting way of approaching something like this. But I actually thought that he would be more effective at that than he ultimately ends up being. It's actually a more realistic portrayal. I thought that it was going to be like he'd be, you know,
I think
a Clint Eastwood kind of character.
I think it's to the film's massive advantage that Singleton goes down that route, though. I didn't mean to formulate that as if I was contradicting you, because I know you agree with this, but like, he is set up as somebody in that scene, for instance, where they're going to lynch someone, and he's looking on, and he's got a gun in his hand. You think, oh well, you know, he's going to shoot the rope or whatever. And they're all going to be like, well, who was that? And he's going to stay in the woods and just fire them off like Mel Gibson in The Patriot. But
right, exactly, yeah.
And it never comes to fruition. And I think actually at one point it makes the Rhames character ultimately extremely vulnerable, right? And he's as open to those ultimately horrific deaths as anybody else is here, and the ways in which he has to help the families and the black community is actually by kind of assuming this sort of this more subtle process of, it's almost like Schindler's List by the end, right, where he's kind of
it is in a way. I mean, but he does indulge in it to a certain extent in the kind of the revenge fantasy where, like, when they attempt to lynch Man, and he kind of somehow he creates a diversion. He makes his horse gallop away, but he manages to, like, you know, free himself from the ropes and you know, cut himself out of the noose, like lifts himself up with one arm, cuts himself out of the noose, and escapes, and they turn around and he's gone, you know. And then when they're finally on the train at the end, they bring in the train that they fill it with the children of Rosewood and the women and children, and you know, try to get them out of the area. He's on the back of the train, and he's like shooting all the pursuing Sumner lynch mob guys off their horses and everything, and it does have a kind of a big sort of action climax kind of feel to it.
A stirring adventure.
But again, I think it's an interesting approach to take to a story like this. I think it's stretching it to call it historical fiction, just because you have one fictional character.
No, I totally agree. I think it's unfair and does a film the disservice. I did think though, like that, the final train ride, like, firstly, okay, I think the high point in the film for me in terms of the dramatic tension, and it's an incredibly difficult scene to watch, is when they surround Sylvester's home. Don Cheadle's character.
Yeah.
The lynch mob, led by sort of jointly by Bruce McGill, who plays Duke Purdy, and Michael Rooker, who plays Sheriff Walker. And
Right, Michael Rooker is kind of
Rooker's a fascinating character in this film, actually, because
he's my favorite character in the film. He's really
the sheriff who well, he embodies a certain liberalism, I would say. He's the wrong side of John Voight's liberalism, or perhaps the same side, but John Voight is able to distance himself from the lynch mob, whereas Rooker isn't. And at any event, they surround Don Cheadle's home, Sylvester's home, and begin to fire into it, and they kill his mother. And it's at that point where you think, oh well, this is a single home that's being surrounded by a group of armed men, and again, like, you're aware at this point that there's a lot of film to go, and you're aware that Don Cheadle's like top billing, or up there at least, and it's like they can't kill him off. I know that much, and yet here he is. He's surrounded. He's in a house with guns, and again, it's that brief moment where you think, well, it's going to be a bit superhero-ish, and he's going to be able to just shoot them off and fend them off like that. And yet, it doesn't work out like that. He does disappear for the rest of the film, and yet, when he does return in that final climatic sequence on horseback, you think, well, where's he been though? Like, I know that when he dies in his own burning house, or ostensibly dies, and Singleton makes a point of not showing him dying, and it's
right,
and it's kind of obvious for me that it's the other guy who's stayed back with him. So when Cheadle kind of returns and shows up again, it's for me, and all of a sudden it goes into a very stirring register. And when he's reunited with his family on the train, and there's a romance in the air with Mann's character and his romantic interest as well.
Yeah, I could have done without that, the romance.
I was reminded a little bit of the scene in Hotel Rwanda, and I'm only reminded perhaps because Don Cheadle was in that as well, where they're kissing on the rooftop, and it sounds like fireworks in the background, and actually it's like death incarnate. And it's like, I think there's a tonal awkwardness there that I don't think the film needs or justifies.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with the. I could have done without the romance altogether, to be honest with you. I said I like the prismatic perspective of something like Higher Learning, and I think this film does something similar. It gives you a lot of different people in a lot of different sort of unique social circumstances, like. Existing in between a lot of different sort of relationships, and you get little moments, where you see, you get little moments like dramatizing like non-central character relationships, almost on a symbolic level, like particularly with the kids, where you would have like during the first lynching scene. One of the kids is like, they have the guy in the back of the pickup truck with the noose around his neck, and like the noose is handed to the kid, and the guy is showing him like, this is how you pull a noose, and it's like passing on this information to the next generation. And then you get another few moments with kids, like the woman encouraging the child to watch the lynching, and the child is trying to cover her eyes, or his eyes, and she's going, you have to look. And the guy's showing the child how to tie the noose knot, and it's like this very active kind of like, this is nothing to do with any kind of perceived notion of justice or even vengeance. This is like tradition. This is like a festival. This is like a fucking festival, where and like there's a lot of really unflinching imagery as well that is really powerful and really brutal, and it's always put in that context. So like there's a shot of a black woman tied to a tree and burned to a crisp.
Yeah.
And they're taking photographs, and the kids are playing like catch or something. They're playing like football or whatever they are, like in the background. And it's like they're at a barbecue. It's like they're at a family function or something.
Yeah.
Which they are in their heads. They are
distressing to watch because of the inclusion of those elements in the frame, and it reminded me, perhaps because Michael Rooker was in it as well, of Mississippi Burning. Yeah. And in which he plays one of the lynch mobs in that, one of the active racists, which is why I was so surprised to see him in this film in a very kind of different, more mature role. But in that film, I remember liking that film a lot because I'm a Gene Hackman fan. And then reading Jim Emerson on it, and he took that film, I think, rightly to bits. And I think one of the images that he fixates upon in his commentary is the image of a burning cross that Parker manages to make look beautiful, right? And it's horrific events happening, and we're not meant to enjoy watching them, of course, in Mississippi Burning, but they're not overly distressing to watch. And I think Singleton's film is a kind of corrective to that, those kinds of mechanisms. It's a subtle change, but just the framing choice is a lot more complicated, savage, angry. I love the final image in the film as well of
the desolate town burned to the ground. Yeah, really powerful. Yeah. But I thought like the planting of those little moments, those little sort of self-contained glimpses of the sort of the complex social and emotional dynamics of this situation and the intergenerational dynamics really like crystallized in that one late scene where it's the next day, but it's still kind of going on, but the main kind of sort of carnage is over, and now all of the family have come out and they're kind of enjoying the aftermath of this as a sort of a festive event. Which is like, it's almost like with the boys that they're teaching how to, it is exactly like with the boys that they're teaching how to tie the noose knot and how to pull a rope, and how, making them watch how it's done, like how these bodies are hoisted onto the trees and everything.
The physical logistics.
You're going to be, you're going to be the man of the house, and you're going to have to do this in the future, and your family are going to want to come out and play and take photographs and celebrate. I think it's a really strong film.
What did you make of Duke Purdy's son at the end of the film, sort of walking away from him? Like, has Singleton earned that moment of catharsis? Do you think? I mean, it's a very bleak film if he doesn't include those kinds of things. But I mean, it's bleak to begin with. It's bleak anyway. I know that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You liked it?
I felt. I liked it, yeah, because I mean, you see that with the kid, like even the kid covering his eyes, Yeah. Yeah.
So I was going to ask, just briefly to wrap this film up, if we may. What did you make of the John Voight character? So as I said, like, on the same side of sort of self-preservationist liberalism as the Michael Rooker character, but able to sort of distance himself a little bit, and then by the end of the film kind of come round to the black cause, or be stirred into the local residents' cause.
Yeah.
Did you think it was sort of a plausible rendition of that? Or rendering?
I can't really comment on the plausibility of it historically, but I think that...
I mean by the way it's dramatized in the film.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't find any problem with that. The only issue on that level I would have was like what we were saying about the romance that kind of is still blossoming in the midst of all this mayhem and horror.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that the tone of that at the end is a little bit too,
and yet it's consistent
joyous.
With Singleton's filmography in general. Like I think especially the films that he made after this point. So it's kind of anticipating those kinds of weird, spiky, awkward tonal ambiguities, and I think he's brushing up to. I don't know if it's a conscious attempt to try and sell the film more widely than if it was just like without those kinds of things.
This film in particular.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, this film was a colossal commercial failure.
Yeah.
So I mean, certainly after this film, he pivoted into much more mainstream films.
Yeah.
What did you make of the scene where the lynch mob is trying to go from town to town, and they're blocked?
Yeah.
They're blocked outside the town of Bronson.
Yeah.
By the police there, and they're saying you're not bringing this into our town.
Yeah.
And there's a moment of a standoff, and then the lynch mob, who are obviously very cowardly anyway, they back down.
Yeah.
I
should say that the entourage of people who are blocking them are white.
Yes. Yeah, and they're saying, our
white
black
and
folks
armoured
are
and-
good, tax-paying, law-abiding people. But what I find interesting, and this brings us back to the Michael Rooker character, who, as I said, is the most interesting character in the film to me. I'm really fascinated by the idea that there is like a sheriff and there's ostensibly, rule of law in a place, and then they just decide, no, not tonight, and it's like he says, I'm the law around here, and somebody takes him aside and says, you were nothing but a chicken farmer until we stuck that badge on you.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have no authority.
The suggestion is that he's been chosen to be the authority because they know that he has none, or that they know that they can just do whatever they want, and he's not going to be able to enforce it.
Exactly. It reminded me of a film that I watched recently, Bad Day at Black Rock.
Oh yeah.
Where again the sheriff in the town is just completely like ineffectual to the point of just like being not even making an effort to control it.
Which is again, I don't know how deeply that's rooted into the history of the event, but like again, it's brushing up against. I mean, it's not a western because of where it's filmed or where it's set, but it's brushing up against that as a genre.
Very much so. Yeah, that's something that I associate with the Wild West kind of towns, but this is set in Florida in the 1920s.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in late 1997, after the release of Rosewood, Singleton started working on his version of Shaft, which had the working title Shaft Returns, which we're going to talk about next. But the following year, in November of '98, he was attached to a film called The Flow, which was a drama about the inner workings of the hip-hop business, and it was going to use composites of real-life rap music world characters to tell the story. That was also never produced. But yeah, so his next project was Shaft Returns, or as it was ultimately released, Shaft.
Bro, I'll be out in an hour.
I don't think so, running man. You see, the van to central processing left about 5 minutes ago. And there won't be another one for hours and hours. By the time you get downtown, we're talking overnight in the Tombs. And they definitely want to rain your ass before morning. It's a shame we didn't get here a little sooner. You look depressed, Walter. You depressed? Yo, peeps, you still here?
The seatbelt on the bind was busted.
Oh, damn.
It's called habeas corpus, motherfucker. That means due process for the illiterate.
It's called You Wanted to Play Games with Me, peoples. I know a shitload of games. You boys play nice.
Teflon down, nigga. Teflon. Beats. Hey, Blanky. What he get you for? Income tax evasion?
Fuck you.
Okay, so as we talked about in relation to Boyz N the Hood, we talked about the appropriation of the blaxploitation form and style and tropes by the by Generation X, by the hip hop generation.
Yeah.
And John Singleton circled back around to that in a much more explicit way when he directed the remake, reboot, sequel, sidequel to 1971's Shaft.
Yeah.
If this film was released today, it would probably be classified as a soft reboot, but I've always known it as a remake. I've still not seen the original Shaft or any of the original 3 films. I did see this when it came out in 2000, but had absolutely no memory of it at all.
Yeah.
I know that you have seen the original.
Yeah.
Had you seen the remake? Or
I hadn't seen the remake, and I also assumed it was a straight remake, which it isn't. Now, this is where it gets a little complicated, because they are both adapted from the same novel by Ernest Tidyman, who in 1971 also wrote The French Connection. And he's
which is a film you don't like.
It's not the best film that I've seen, let's say. But what am I talking about? Of course it is. So he wrote novels featuring Shaft. They are adapted from the same novel, so the same original source is credited, and yet Shaft from 1971 as a character, John Shaft, played by Richard Roundtree, features as does Roundtree playing him, in the 2000 film as Samuel L. Jackson's uncle.
Yes.
And Shaft in 1971 is a private eye. He's a private detective. At the beginning of the 2000 film, he's not. He's an actual cop.
Yeah, he's a detective.
And I suppose the storylines are extremely similar in that both revolve around missing women, or women who Shaft is in, or a woman who Shaft is in search of. In the first film, Shaft is hired to find a kidnapped woman who is at the center of this escalating ethno gangster war. And in the second film, well, let's say the 2000 film, Shaft is after somebody a witness to a racist murder, who has gone into hiding.
Right.
So
yeah,
this is sort of brings it up to date.
Yeah. So
I like the
of,
first film a lot. I hadn't watched it until very recently, and yeah, I mean it's a very, very different film and feel to Singleton's.
Right. Well, the 70s were the peak period for studio production of black films.
Yeah.
I was reading that in 1971, a quarter of all films in production at the studios were targeting black audiences.
Right. Okay.
Whereas that's not so much the case in the late 90s.
No.
Also, if you look, and this is very much true for John Singleton, if you look at the films that he made following the success of Boyz N the Hood, and including Boyz N the Hood,
yeah.
A lot of that, the appropriation of the blaxploitation form and its fusion with the gangster rap aesthetic and milieu, is really carrying on the tradition of the heightened black consciousness of those blaxploitation films.
Yeah.
That was reflecting the post 1960s civil rights era in which they were produced. But as we just mentioned about in relation to Rosewood, these films were not commercially successful in the 90s. So with you have black indie filmmakers making political films for black audiences that black audiences are rejecting, which is sort of similar to, you might say, somebody like Ken Loach making working class films for working class people, but when working class people want to watch the Avengers and Star Wars. So in following the failure of Rosewood, the commercial failure of Rosewood, Singleton pivoted into this. In what you would understand to be quite a career conscious move.
Yeah, I don't know how reluctant or begrudging the move was. I mean, it's material made for him, though, in many ways.
Yeah.
In terms of its.
And this is also Samuel L. Jackson at the height of his leading man potential, as a box office draw. Like, this movie is about Samuel. I mean, if you look at the poster, it even says Samuel L. Jackson, Shaft. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. That's the elevator pitch is Samuel L. Jackson plays Shaft.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't fly today. Sam Jackson doesn't really lead films these days anymore. He plays supporting roles.
It's true. For half a moment there, just to say very quickly, I thought you were going, because you mentioned Loach, I thought you were going to suggest that Paul Laverty writes a Shaft film, or his version of a Shaft film, which I imagine would be terrible. Can you imagine that? No, but coming back to Jackson, you see, the funny thing is, Richard Roundtree is extremely good in the 1971 film, but his institutional vulnerability is written into the character because he's a private eye, kind of outside of the law, which does allow him to do certain things and go certain places, and know certain people and contacts that the cops don't have access to, which is why, the first, I mean, as a sort of symbol of that, the very first image in the film is him kind of walking across the road. And I think director Gordon Parks, I don't know how much of an urban myth this is, but Gordon Parks said, if the traffic's been told and whatnot, and, you can just walk across the road. And he shot from on high from a building, and apparently the traffic hadn't been informed that Richard Roundtree was going to walk out into the traffic, and so all of the car horns that we hear are very, very real and very, very aggrieved drivers wondering why this guy has a death wish by walking out into New York traffic. And so I think that, symbolized his sort of tough, rugged edge, and it's a very, very different. I mean, it is a different character. It's John Shaft 2 or John Shaft II. Yeah. But let's for the sake of discussing the film, talk about it like a version of Shaft.
Well, it is. What you have is a film that is technically a sequel.
Yeah.
Or technically a spin-off, but is in spirit it is absolutely a remake. It's I would compare it to the 2011 version of The Thing, where
right.
They obviously the initial concept was, let's do a remake of The Thing, and then somebody said, hey, we can actually position this as a prequel because The Thing has this preamble that's set at a different base, and what happened at the Norwegian base would have been pretty similar to what happened at the American base in the original, so we can avoid the stigma of the remake by incorporating this and technically positioning it as a sequel. But in spirit it's a remake, and you can tell that just by the fact that they didn't bother giving the film a different title. This is not Shaft 2 or Shaft with a subtitle, it's just Shaft. So in spirit it is a remake, so I think it can be discussed in those terms.
You can kind of see the same thing on a sort of structural template level happening on a the formulas by which the Star Wars films, the new Star Wars film last year was made, not last year, the one in 2015. And in it, to a certain degree, Blade Runner 2014 as well, kind of playing with
2049.
Sorry. And the same thing to a certain degree happening with Blade Runner 2049. But yeah, no, you're right though. But it's more explicitly handled in this.
Right. No, but what I'm saying is simply that the pitch was clearly a remake of Shaft starring Sam Jackson.
Yeah.
And if we can get Richard Roundtree in here, fine. If not, fine. If he had said no, then they wouldn't have bothered positioning it as a sequel. It's completely disposable. It's this kind of like bolted on potential, but it's not at all necessary to the story. He doesn't actively involve himself in the story, really.
Yeah. And I'm right.
How do they compare?
Yeah. So, how do they compare? I think the 71 version is a lot shaggier. I mean, this is John Singleton's shortest film. And it's about the 95 minutes. It's about the same length as the first one, but it seems more focused. Christian Bale as Walter Wade is in very early on as the antagonist who ends up being the guy who they're after. So it has a story and structure here that is a lot more sort of coherent. 71 version, he spends the first 10-15 minutes just sort of introducing him as a figure, as a character. And I think that's the appeal of somebody like Shaft. And I haven't seen the two sequels that were made in the 70s, but
Shaft's Big Score and Shaft in Africa. Yeah. There was also a short-lived series of I think series of telefilms that Richard Roundtree is very dismissive of.
Yeah, I mean, you can
because
imagine...
obviously it had to be toned down for television in the 70s.
Yeah. But I mean, the stories in both are kind of slight, and the character is the point is the character, and he lends himself to that sort of serial universe of okay, let's telegraph this likable character who's larger than the story in to solve a case each week, or from film to film. And it's actually surprising that they haven't made other Shaft films when you think of it in that way. With Samuel L. Jackson,
Well, there is one in development that's going to star Sam Jackson and Richard Roundtree and a third actor, and it's also just going to be called Shaft, and he's going to play the son of Shaft. So it's listed on IMDb as son of Shaft, but it'll be called Shaft. Because
so that'll be three films set successively to one another, all called Shaft.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Is that the first time that's ever been done? I think it might be.
One thing I saw this film when it came out, and I remember thinking it was fine, but there are other films that I saw in 2000 or at the same time that this film came out that I remember in reasonable detail.
Yeah.
Having not seen them since.
Yeah.
This one I had no memory of at all.
Okay.
I didn't remember that Christian Bale was in it. I didn't remember that Toni Collette was in it. I couldn't have told you anything about it except that Samuel L. Jackson plays Shaft.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. And watching it again, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
It's whatever, but it's immediately it's already evaporating from my memory. It's really
weird, isn't it?
very very boilerplate.
I suppose that and it's exactly the same with the 1971 version as well. It's like you remember Shaft, and I think that it reinforces the idea of this, character who is bigger than the story somehow. I mean, like this. I like Christian Bale in it. I think he's he embodies
fun.
that horrible, entitled, arrogant, murderous racist very well.
Yeah.
And what did you make of Jeffrey Wright as Peoples Hernandez?
Well, so I do think that it's so here's the thing, right? So the premise is that Christian Bale, as you said, plays this son of a real estate mogul or something like that. He's he murders a young black man played by Mekhi Phifer at the beginning for humiliating him in front of his friends. Which it's in retaliation for being antagonized by Christian Bale. And that's the murder that Toni Collette's character witnesses. But then he skips Bale.
And heads to Switzerland.
And heads to Switzerland. And then when he comes back, he hires a gangster played by Jeffrey Wright, named Peoples,
Hernandez.
to find and kill Toni Collette's character.
Diane Palmieri.
Diane, right? Who we're told has been running for 2 years.
Yeah.
But she never left her neighborhood
In New York, yeah. I mean, she works
which I
in a
thought
local
was really
school.
funny. I'm like, she couldn't possibly be hard to find. She didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Still in contact with her family and everything. It's a kind of unintentionally funny plot point, but because Shaft finds her with no hassle at all. He's just he just walks down the street and there she is. It's like these guys have been trying to find her for years, and this guy with all this money behind him, just hire like a private investigator. But anyway, I thought Jeffrey Wright was quite good. Fairly funny, and I think one of my major criticisms of the film is that it's not funny enough, and that it would work better if it's funny. Is Richard Roundtree funnier in the original than Sam Jackson is in this? No. Right. Because Sam Jackson has his moments in this, but
it's strange because I mean, like it's perfectly reasonable to conceive of an obnoxious, kind of a borderline obnoxious character like Shaft to be also extremely funny.
Yeah.
Right. And he's one, but I don't think he's enough of the other. I would agree. But at the same time, though, I wouldn't knock Jackson's performance. That's a script thing, right?
No, his performance is fine. I don't think he's great in it. He's just kind of it's a fairly kind of middle of the road kind of Sam Jackson performance, I think.
Yeah.
Where it's just kind of enough that he's in the role.
Yeah.
And he's not really bringing anything hugely special to it. But again, that's also a script thing. I do think that it's weird. So the plot is that Christian Bale hires Jeffrey Wright to find Toni Collette.
Yeah.
But that means that when the final climactic showdown between Shaft and the bad guy happens, the bad guy is Peoples, Jeffrey Wright, who has no real emotional investment in killing Diane. So it's like it feels weirdly like this kind of proxy conflict. Whereas the real villain of the film is Christian Bale, Walter Wade. He's like Peoples is just a hired hand. He has no, he's not. His efforts to silence Diane are motivated purely by what seems, in the context of the film, to be a relatively paltry amount of money.
Yeah, I mean,
like 40 grand.
I mean, arguably, you could say that he has a personal investment in the fact that he's been humiliated by Shaft in the neighborhood. Week previously.
His brother has been killed at that point.
Yeah, at that point
by the cops. But it just feels like, why are we going down this road? with this
Yeah,
character.
no, I agree. And it's
But
I think it's
kind
also
of pushing the main conflict to the side to a large extent.
yeah, it's also compounded by the fact that is it Peoples who also hires the cops to kind of double cross Shaft.
Yeah.
And it all gets unnecessarily convoluted. And I actually think the first film as well, like at one point I'm like, I'm not sure what's happening here, but I'm enjoying it anyway because it's Shaft, whatever. Yeah, I agree with that though, and I also think again though it reinforces the idea that the story here could be whatever, and it's how the character sort of negotiates his way out of things. So it feels very much like a big budget TV narrative in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it fair to say?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I do think that we talked when we talked about Higher Learning, you said that Ice Cube showed huge growth as an actor.
Yeah.
Relative to his performance in Boyz N the Hood. I think I would say the same thing here about Busta Rhymes relative to his performance in Higher Learning.
Yeah.
In Higher Learning, he's so one note.
Yeah.
Like he's just like being Busta Rhymes.
Yeah.
In this one, he is really he's the funniest character in the film.
Yeah.
He has a lot of very funny one-liners. I also thought it was interesting to see two of the Wire actors pre-Wire.
Yeah.
You have Kima Greggs is in it, and so is Bubbles.
Although Bubbles or Andre Royo is unfortunately dispatched very early in thrown out of the window into the street below, and it actually reminded me, although it anticipates both films, Infernal Affairs and The Departed, where he's in the car as kind of Shaft's informant, and the cops who know Shaft going by, and they're kind of informing with Peoples, and it's this like dual thing that the resolution to which comes about extremely quickly because it's in the next scene that Royo is shafted, let's say. But and Kima Greggs in the bar, as you said. Always good to see a wire face.
I think it's a pretty disposable film. It's not bad, but
like, how do you think that, like, as his sort of first explicit delve into genre filmmaking, like, do you think it's competently directed? Whatever else you think of the script and everything.
I think it's perfectly competently put together.
Yeah.
It just doesn't really excel in any area.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough.
Okay, so having adapted someone else's material for Rosewood, and then having worked with studio IP for Shaft, his next project was a return to his roots with another original screenplay, Baby Boy.
What are you looking at, man? Nigga trying to psych me out, talking about he a killer and all. Old school nigga. He don't want us to have to put that heat on his ass, do we, P?
You want me to check him out?
Nah. Let the nigga breathe. He make my mom unhappy. He make his ass bleed. On the real, make him feel the steel. Long as she happy, he got his life. Won't be no strife. And I hope his ass hear me too, nigga.
I hear you. You know the problem with you little niggas? You think you know everything about the damn world, and you don't know shit. Now, I see you got yourself a little business going. Well, that's good, that's good. You make that paper. But when you making paper, you gotta learn some rules to go with it. You gotta learn the difference between guns and butter. There are two type of niggas in this world. There are niggas with guns and niggas with butter. Now, what are the guns? The guns, that's the real estate. The stocks and bonds. Artwork, shit that appreciates with value. What's the butter? Cars, clothes, jewelry, all that other bullshit that don't mean shit after you buy it. That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby. You little dumb motherfuckers.
So after delving into a genre film, Baby Boy represents something of a return to the kinds of social issue dramas. In fact, I'd say something of a return. It's a kind of full-footed full return. And the introduction into his filmography of Tyrese Gibson as Jodie Summers, a 20-year-old still living with his mother, who had him when she was 16, played by Juanita, played by Adrienne Joy Johnson. And Jodie has, well, multiple girlfriends, but for the purpose of the film's narrative, he has kind of two.
Yeah.
And he has a child.
He has 2 children.
Yeah, so a child to each of them.
Yeah.
It's a long film. It's a
a long film. Yeah.
It's a in many ways a drama that I think could be shortened somewhat. Although I'm hesitant to open a critique or assessment of this film on the negative side, because I did actually like it. Did you?
Yeah, so I liked it too.
Yeah.
I was surprised actually, because it's a movie that I remember seeing it in the video shop a lot. You know, Tyrese and like Snoop Dogg is on the cover as well.
That's right.
Even though Snoop Dogg has a relatively minor role in the film. In fact, at a certain point, I was thinking, there had been the one scene with him making the call from prison.
Yeah.
I was like, was that it? You know, is he gonna come back?
Yeah. I had cheated. You see,
it's. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I had cheated, you see, because I had read the synopsis on the back of the DVD box, and it says when Yvette's boyfriend Rodney, in brackets Snoop Dogg, is back in town. So like, as if that's part of the premise of the film, and of course it's not. It doesn't happen until like the second half. So it's like I too thought, I thought too, like you, like, well, that's the one scene. But then I thought, well, if he's back in town, what's happening here? Again, though, because of this, I think because of the length of the film, it's a very strangely structured film. And there's several different things going on in his life, like the relationship to his mother, the relationship to her partner Melvin, an ex-convict played by Ving Rhames, again from Rosewood, and then his multiple relationships and how he negotiates that world. So, in many respects, it's got all the makings of a fascinating drama that looks at, through the prism of one person's eyes, how different social pressures multiply to create that person's habitus, let's say.
Yeah, I agree that it is probably too long, because it does at times feel very repetitive. It's relatively plotless, and that kind of results in there being no sort of natural duration for the film, no sort of internal clock that suggests this film should kind of this should happen at this point, rather than this other point. So it also, I mentioned in relation to Poetic Justice, watching people screaming in each other's faces, and my limited tolerance for that, and this gives you a lot of that. Luckily, in this film, it's funnier than it is in Poetic Justice. It's more substantial and it's more varied in context. Tyrese Gibson is funnier than the actor. I forget the name of the actor who played Chicago in Poetic Justice. But I do think that Tyrese Gibson is playing an interesting character here. A character that's relatively unique. He's not a hood movie archetype. He's a very three-dimensional character with a lot of different facets to his personality. My favorite scene in the film, my favorite, sort of dramatic, substantial scene in the film is the scene after he's beaten up by the teenagers, and he gets his friend who is a little bit pulled between kind of like sort of a moral, law-abiding life and sort of a more violent, sort of gang-affiliated life, to help him find those teenagers, and they get guns and they go, and it recalls the scene at the end of Boyz N the Hood where Doughboy and his his friends go looking for Ricky's killers, and they carry out this revenge murder, and you think that's it very very strongly evokes that, and you're led to believe that that's where this is going. But instead, it turns into a scene that I've never seen before. A really strangely funny, sad, weird scene in the park where they just line up all the teenagers at gunpoint and then like practice their right hooks on them.
Yeah.
And it's it's a really weird scene. And you can see the conflict in Jody being Tyrese Gibson, his internal conflict with this kind of thing. Like he feels that this is something that
Yeah, because it's very much
like
Sweet
sort of
Pea, played by Omar Gooding, who is
Right.
kind of leading that, right? Leading that violent.
Yeah, very much so.
comeuppance.
He even kind of humiliates Jody. Jody throws the first punch, and then he's like, what kind of punch is that? You call that a punch? And
Yeah.
this is how you throw a punch, and try again, and he's it's very much like it's almost like this is a kind of a rite of passage sort of thing for Jody, that he feels like he should do this, and this is what a man would do in this situation. And
it's wince-inducing
really
as well,
in him.
right? It's because it's a brutal scene, but that doesn't
Yeah,
prevent
it's a
it
very
from also
complex-
being quite funny as well. Like,
yeah, that's what I mean. It's a really unique scene where the tone is there 2 or 3 different kind of conflicting feelings going on in the scene.
And
Excellent scene.
Yeah, this is what I mean by a kind of Singletonian tone. Like scratchily comical in a way, like, finding the absurd in like brutal everyday scenarios in these kinds of people's lives. Even like, you mentioned the loud domestic arguments that some of the characters have here, particularly Jody and his girlfriend Yvette, played by Taraji Henson. Those kinds of scenes, I agree, can become very quickly exhausting and frustrating to watch and to kind of endure.
Particularly if they're not to, as I said in relation to Poetic Justice, if they're not to any particular end, if they're not either funny, or sad, or dramatically consequential.
Yeah.
If it's just this is just the way that these characters interact regularly, I don't need to see a lot of that.
Yeah. And yet we do see a lot of it here, and yet again, there isn't, in terms of plot, there isn't a real end to them ostensibly when they're happening, and yet tonally, sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're extremely tense, because actually, I mean, the film begins with a shot of Jodie hitting Yvette, right? And so it's like it anticipates that moment later in the film in which he does.
Sorry,
kind of by accident. Sorry?
The film begins with an amazing image of
it does.
Tyrese Gibson in the womb.
Yeah.
Tyrese Gibson in the womb, which is like I was very ready to love the movie from that opening image.
Yes, and
very strange and striking image.
When I saw it, I did think that's arguably Singleton's single most memorable image. Arguably.
Possibly, yeah, up there.
What did you make of Ving Rhames' character, Melvin?
He was my favorite thing about the film.
Yeah.
I thought he was also a very complex character, where you see, because initially you see him from, so Melvin is Jodie's mother's new boyfriend, who is an ex-con, he served 10 years in prison, who now owns his own, is it like a landscaping business or something like that? Yeah. So he's moving in to the house, and Jodie is defensive about this. He feels that if this man moves in, he's going to want him to move out, and his older brother was asked to move out the last time one of their mother's boyfriends moved in, and he ended up getting killed on the streets. So Jodie is very wary of this guy, and initially you see this character of Melvin from Jodie's perspective, and you kind of are led to believe that he is as Jodie sees him, and it's as simple as that. That he's this thug who's kind of cozying up to his mother because he wants kind of like a roof over his head and a hot meal and whatever. But you see a lot of different sides to that character, and you see a real sort of internal conflict in that character as the film goes on.
Yeah, he's
he's also the funniest thing about the film as well. I mean, the scene where Jodie walks in and I'm cooking breakfast naked is so funny, and Jodie's reaction to it is just hilarious.
I also thought of that great image which Singleton cuts from like across the living room, the living area where him and Juanita are having sex, kind of standing up, hopping
Yeah.
along across the room.
Yeah, that's when Jodie is in the bedroom next door. Yeah.
That's right.
That's
And
very funny.
I don't know, like I read Melvin as a sort
he's
of
describing the position to him to her as they're doing it. It's really really funny, the hopping frog or something.
I read Melvin as a brawnier, less intellectual version of Professor Phipps in Higher Learning, actually, in terms of and less pretentious, and more real, and more relatable, and messier as a character
With a better accent.
With a better accent. Who sees himself in, the younger character, in this case Jodie, and his advice is more sort of tough love, and he does give Jodie an opportunity to take that on board. Jodie doesn't, throws it back in his face, and I like the fact that Singleton doesn't make it easy for us to side with any particular character in that tension there. Like, he is kind of lazy, and yet we can see reasons why he kind of is protective of his own sort of comforts, etc., etc. And nobody's really to blame. I think the only real one character who is introduced in the film who turns out to be like dismissible on a moral level is Rodney, Snoop Dogg, who actually, when he does show up to Yvette's flat, assuming that he still has a place there, is extremely funny. Like, it's a funny performance by Snoop Dogg. And again, like, I don't know if it's Singleton feeling extremely confident by this point in his career, but like to then shift very dramatically and very quickly from that kind of comic performance to a scene in which we're led to believe he's going to rape Yvette in front of her son.
In front of her son.
Yeah, it's incredibly awkward, and I mean,
even,
not awkward, it's challenging.
Yeah, but even that scene, even the scene that ends up in that at that moment, begins with Yvette walking into the living room where Rodney is asleep on the couch.
Yeah.
And kicking the couch to wake him up, and he wakes up and he's kind of annoyed at being so rudely awakened, and then he looks across the room and the kid has built a fort out of the pillows.
Yeah.
And he says something like, "Oh, you built a fort, little man?"
Yeah.
And you think it's like this scene where you think he's gonna try to bond with him, and instead he just walks up and says, "I don't give a shit about your fort," and kicks the fort down, and the kid's like, "I hate you," and he's like, "I hate you too." It's a really interesting, unique scene, and
because
then
it's
it pivots, like you
simultaneously
said, into that really
again.
dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny at first, and then it just pivots really quickly into that extremely dark territory. I don't know. I think would you say that seems like a pretty accurate representation of what it must be like to have Snoop Dogg crashing on your sofa?
I mean, yeah. I mean, jeez, it's
he seems to be playing himself.
Yeah.
But and then he also has his the East Siders, his rap group from that period, are his friends and that who ultimately go with him to try to kill Jodie.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a possible step too far in an otherwise very ambitious, confidently handled film. That, okay, we're aware that Rodney has done something terrible to be in jail for 10 years. Okay, we know he's capable of nasty things and whatnot. I don't deny that, and I don't deny it as a concept that works within the film. But like, in order to then usher in the sort of end point of the film, and thereby Jodie's coming of age, belated coming of age, Rodney embodies this, like, gun wielding murderer again, and is that a little cartoonish, maybe?
No, I don't really understand what you mean.
I just mean, like, does it need? I mean, is it used merely as like a plot device to introduce like the Snoop Dogg character, like to make so because there's parallels between Jodie and Rodney, right? They're both kind of like lazy, directionless people, but like one's kind of good natured, good hearted. He's a right lad on the, but he just needs to grow up a little bit, and the other one's like he's been in jail, he's already that far gone, and like. I don't know, like just the introduction of a worse version of Jodie in order for Jodie to then grow up as like a a bit of a plot device. It just felt a little contrived to me.
Yeah, I don't mind that though. I mean, like he kind of represents the life that Jody is afraid that he'll get drawn into if he's made to leave his mother's house.
Yeah.
And I think the scene where they do, where he and P ultimately do kill Rodney is very good.
Yeah.
Where Jody decides that he can't do it.
Yeah.
And P does it instead. Yeah, I mean, I like it. What did you make about the ending, the happy ending? Because I mean, this is a Hood film that kind of in many ways thematically and dramatically revisits a lot of the stuff that we saw already in Boyz N the Hood.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have a tragic ending.
Yeah.
It gives you a fantasy version of the tragic ending. It gives you a fantasy version of like the Ricky murder in Boyz N the Hood, but then it turns out that didn't actually happen.
Yeah.
We see Rodney and his cohorts killing Jody on P's front lawn.
Yeah, it pulls the rug. Yeah.
And then it turns out that he actually didn't get killed.
Yeah, I mean, and then the very end of the film, which is a very cathartic ending, it does seem sort of similar manner to something like Taxi Driver or The King of Comedy. Does seem a little bit consciously fantastical in a way that it could be read as like, yes, but on Singleton's part. It's like it's almost too rosy.
Yeah, because throughout the film we get these dreams and visions of various different possible futures for Jody.
That's right.
Like as in going to jail, being killed, and so on.
Yeah.
But
one thing I did think just from the very beginning, I was like, how old is Jody meant to be? And it wasn't until I read synopses and stuff that he's meant to be 28, and it's probably said in the film as well, but I overlooked it. But
yeah, it is said. Yeah, it says his mother says something about owing her for the last 20 years.
Okay, that's right. So you said that it's a very interesting character, and I totally agree with that. I was going to ask, and I'm trying to ask it in a way that doesn't sound like a criticism, but do you think it's an interestingly played character? Because Tyrese Gibson, I don't know, seems, I mean, he's a similar age to Jody. He just seems like a little, almost too experienced for the role. And I don't know if that's due to his physique or the fact that I watched this after watching all of the Too Fast, Too Furious films. And actually, this character is a lot more mature than the character who plays in Too Fast, Too
Roman
Furious,
Pierce,
which we'll come to. But
I thought his performance was good. Yeah, I thought he demonstrates quite a lot of range. I think he's funny. No, I think he hits all the notes pretty well. I mean, I think the standout performance in the film is Ving Rhames, but yeah, I mean, as your first feature film role, and to carry the film, to be in I think he's in almost every scene in the film, isn't he? I mean, there are a few scenes with
Yvette and Rodney and Juanita.
Yeah, Yvette. Yeah, and Yvette also calling her friend, talking about. Yeah, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't wish to misarticulate my question or qualm there, because it's not necessarily a qualm. But firstly, I thought he looks a lot older than 20, and I felt that the performance, if anything, and it's a strange criticism to make, I'm aware of this, but if anything, was just too experienced. Like, he lends a gravitas that I don't think a 20-year-old in that situation, the character.
Oh, I see what you
mean.
Yeah. Yeah, that might be a reason that I initially thought that he was playing way below his age, but I mean he wasn't. He was playing like Tyrese was.
Yeah, he was like 21, 22.
He was 21. Yeah, 21 shooting the film, and he looks a lot. You're right. He looks a lot older than 21, and he acts older than 21. But
whereas like all of the three performances in Boyz N the Hood, feel very much of that age group and that experience, and dramatizing that as well.
Right, but do you think that it affects the film? Like, if you were to say, okay, let's say Jody is 25 or 28, it doesn't really have any bearing on the film substantially.
No. It doesn't. But it was something that I had to think about and process during watching it.
Yeah, no, I was certainly surprised to discover that he was only 21 in the film.
Yeah,
because you're right, he looks a lot older. Okay. So in December 2001, after the release of Baby Boy, Singleton was attached to direct a big budget version of Sinbad for Columbia, which was based on a screenplay by Teddy Sarafian, who had just written Terminator 3. And it was described at the time as a special effect heavy tentpole that would have mixed the spectacle of period actioners like The Mummy and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and 8th century Raiders of the Lost Ark on steroids.
Wow.
That was later taken over by Rob Cohen in 2005, and then again by Adam Shankman in 2008. And a new script was commissioned by John J. McLaughlin, who wrote Black Swan, in 2012. But the film remains unmade. So this is a project that's been Sony Columbia have been trying to make for 17 years.
And Singleton was the first name attached to that project.
Seemingly, yeah, it was to be a reaction to the success of The Mummy.
Yeah.
In '99. Yeah, and in the later coverage of it, they talk about the ways in which they're going to try to differentiate it from the Pirates of the Caribbean series and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it remains unmade.
That's a shame.
Fan of Sinbad?
Not particularly. Would you have liked to have seen John Singleton's Sinbad?
I don't think I would.
Maybe it's a question better asked at the end of the episode when we've covered some of his ventures into action filmmaking.
Anyway, in May of 2002, so I mentioned that Rob Cohen took over that project in 2005, but in May of 2002, John Singleton took over from Rob Cohen on the sequel to The Fast and the Furious, Too Fast, Too Furious.
Brian O'Connor, Roman Pierce, need Monica Fuentes.
Do they have background on Verone?
They've been briefed.
Good. All right, here's the deal. Verone's looking for drivers. I've arranged for both of you to join up. I've also hired some thugs, to make it legit.
When do we start?
Right now.
What are we driving?
Hey, true, baby, that's the track. We're gonna take it to the top, and that's the truth first.
Don't even think about taking the convertible. It might loosen your moose.
No, that's cool. That's too much chrome for me anyways.
Damn. Where y'all confiscate these rims from, man?
Check in with us after you meet. You think you're gonna have any problems with these two knuckleheads?
I can handle them.
If they give you any trouble at all, you let me know.
Thanks, Marco. I'll ride with you, cowboy.
Why she gotta ride with you?
You get the convertible. Let's go.
You recently watched the entire Fast and Furious series.
Yes.
In preparation for The Fate of the Furious.
Yes.
Which remains your number one film of the year, I believe.
Well, I'm still processing it after watching Blade Runner 2014, but
right.
Yes, continue.
2014, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose that Tyrese's relationship with John Singleton is the thing that brought him into the Fast and Furious series, and I'm sure that's something that he's eternally grateful for.
Yes.
Because obviously, it's gone on to considerable success.
Yeah.
And also another interesting. You remember that Ja Rule was in the first film? Initially, the character introduced in this film, played by Ludacris, was offered to Ja Rule,
okay.
but Ja Rule turned it down because he wanted the role played by Tyrese Gibson. He didn't want a small supporting role.
Okay.
But obviously, Ludacris also went on to become one of the stars of the series.
Yeah.
So I'm sure Ja Rule ruse the day.
Yeah, one man's loss is another
turned
man's
down.
gain. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But okay, so this film is obviously this is the second installment in the Fast and Furious series, 2003. Probably the most poorly received of the films.
Weirdly,
the least liked.
Well,
I think it's I think it's underrated.
It's the least Fast and Furious film of the Fast and Furious franchise. I mean, 3 is completely different in terms of setting and characters, but it's very Fast and Furious oriented. I mean, other than like the gratuitous reintroduction of Paul Walker's character here, in which he wins a race, and then there's a race like halfway through. Like
Yeah.
this feels very tight and enclosed in a way that the others feel very sort of Bondian or increasingly Bondian.
Bondian? Oh, you mean like James Bond?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, all right, yeah, okay. So yeah, I know what you mean. I think this one has the most the most kind of boilerplate plot
Yes.
of any of them. Obviously the original is kind of a unofficial remake of Point Break.
Yeah.
Has the more or less the exact same plot as Point Break. This one feels more like a kind of a Miami Vice kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is it's very like we said the guy, what's his name, who plays the lead neo-Nazi in Higher Learning? Cole Hauser. Okay, so Cole Hauser comes back and plays another villain in another John Singleton film. Here he plays
Caught of our own.
Right, yeah. So big kind of drug lord in Miami. So at the end of the first film, Brian O'Connor, played by Paul Walker, let Dominic Toretto, played by Vin Diesel, go.
Yeah.
Which meant that he then had to, leave the police force, and lambs it to Miami.
Yeah.
There's also a short film, the turbocharged prelude to Too Fast, Too Furious, that came on the DVD, which just shows him driving to Miami. It's not very good.
I mean, as road movies go, it's a little shorter than Poetic Justice. Let's say.
It's concise, to the point. But okay, so this one, he gets arrested, and basically he's presented with this choice. He can either go to jail for his actions in California, or else he can go undercover to help the DEA, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bust this drug lord, and he insists on choosing his own partner, and he chooses a childhood friend who he has previously had a falling out with, and this is Roman Pierce, played by Tyrese Gibson. And I mean, I think it's kind of an interesting approach to bring someone back from Brian's past, and then use the relationship with that character to offer further insight into his actions in the previous film.
Yes.
Which is like his guilt about what happened to his friend, because when the reason that they had a falling out was that Brian, there was, it's not really made 100% clear, is it, what exactly happened, but Roman Pierce ended up going to prison for a few years over something, and always blamed Brian for it.
Yeah.
And that the guilt associated with that and that falling out is what kind of contributed to some extent to him letting Dom go at the end of the first film. I think it's an interesting kind of it's not really necessary to do that, but it's an interesting kind of way of approaching that character, giving that character a purpose beyond just being the sidekick.
It is. It's,
I mean,
because at that point they weren't to know that Tyrese Gibson was going to star in multiple sequels after this.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, they didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, this series
agree.
basically just died on the vine in the next entry, and then was resurrected with a kind of soft reboot with the fourth film, so which brought everybody back. So, like, none of these people are in the third film. I mean, I think that I like undercover cop stories.
Yeah.
Because I just think they're unbearably tense.
Yeah.
They're like the isolation and the powerlessness and the, that those scenes where the person that they're trying to that they're investigating or whatever kind of knows. It's like in The Departed as well, that like like the knot in your stomach. You can't even imagine what it must be like.
Yeah.
To think that you're about to be found out. And like the scene in this film, which I had forgotten about, which is really, really good, is the scene with the rat.
Oh yeah, when they're in the club,
where they put where they take the cop and they're trying to get him to agree to participate in this diversion that they're trying to create to allow the drugs to be transported, and he's resistant to it. He doesn't want to put himself in that kind of position, so they take a rat and put it on his stomach and put a bucket on top of the rat and start heating the bucket with a blowtorch.
Yeah.
And they're telling him that when the bucket gets hot enough, the rat will try to escape, and the only way it'll be able to escape is to go through him.
Yeah.
And then the rat starts scratching at his stomach, and he eventually acquiesces. But exactly. So it's a really good scene. It's like something out of Scarface. and very. I mean, it's got to be it's got to be the darkest scene in any of the Fast and Furious movies. So I don't know. I think it's an underrated, like, it's a formula undercover buddy cop thriller.
Yeah.
But it's it's structured around car chase set pieces that I think are entertaining. I don't really get the hate for this film.
No, I don't either. I mean, like, I think a large part of the tension that you've mentioned there is that Cole Hauser plays a very good baddie. Cole Hauser, and I forgot to say this regarding Higher Learning as well. He has a very strange voice, very strange accent. It's very, very difficult to kind of mark it out geographically. I actually thought, because when I saw Too Fast, Too Furious earlier this year, I hadn't seen Higher Learning. And so when I was watching Higher Learning, I didn't realise it was him to begin with. He's very good in both films, but in this film, he looks a bit like Matthew McConaughey. And I can actually imagine Matthew McConaughey as this character, kind of like a strong silent type. And I don't know, the introduction to Roman you've mentioned already, but it feels very different to all of the other Fast and Furious films. Sorry.
Yeah, but I mean, so does the. I mean, it does have that depiction of the underground street racing subculture, and the final, like, major plot point is rooted in the camaraderie of those racers, who they all kind of come together and help out Brian and Roman, and it's I enjoy the kind of the larger than life depiction of that subculture in these films, which was left behind in the more successful later Fast and Furious movies.
No. I mean,
but
I agree.
I don't like that. I don't like the third film because it takes itself way too seriously, whereas this one is very kind of tongue in cheek and very kind of just like trashy in an enjoyable way. And I think that Singleton's visual style contributes to that as well. Like, he's doing a lot of the CGI fly through visuals in the engine, and like when they hit the nitro booster thing, the camera zooms in and you get this kind of computer generated image of the engine firing, and it's like the techniques that David Fincher had been using in the previous years in Fight Club and Panic Room. These CGI fly throughs. I don't know, I think it's a pretty solid, fun movie. Pretty disposable, but
the visual moment I like is when so Eva Mendes is kind of like also undercover here as well, and she's the more romantic interest of Paul Walker's character, Brian, and they're in the car together, and Roman's in the other car, Tyrese Gibson, and I don't think it's a tracking zoom. I just think it's a straight zoom into Brian's face, and then it's a reverse shot, and it's a zoom into Eva Mendes' face as well, and like Paul Walker's looking at her, and their eyes are locked, and I don't know, you just get a real sense of like, this is ridiculous, but it works, on an emotional
funny,
level.
And then Roman, and then he accelerates and doesn't look at the road, and David looks at her, and then when they finally he screeches to a halt at the traffic lights, and then Roman pulls up beside him and says, did he do the what did he say?
He did the thing with the eyes, didn't he?
The stare and drive or something like that. It's like something out of Seinfeld.
I mean,
stare and drive.
I'm sure Tyrese Gibson's grateful to Singleton for introducing him into the franchise in this way. Although I do think that his character, I mean, as he demonstrated already in Baby Boy, and even demonstrates even in this film, he's worth a lot more than I think the franchise gives him from here on out. Because he, for me, the character turns out to be kind of the weak point, not his performance, but the character. I think he's a little one note in the subsequent films and the other sequels.
Roman,
he's used for.
But as the cast expands, it becomes more difficult. Like he's co-lead here, whereas in the other films he's kind of on the same level as like Ludacris and. You mentioned Eva Mendes. She was introduced as a potential love interest for Brian O'Connor, but then when they brought back Vin Diesel, so they brought back Jordana Brewster. As his love interest. John Singleton said he was a huge fan of the original. That was what drew him to the sequel. He said, when I saw the Fast and the Furious, I was like, damn, why didn't I think of that? Growing up in South Central LA, we had street races all the time. It's very infused with early 2000s hip hop culture in a way that I would say I recently watched the original Triple X as well, and it feels In fact, both of these films, I would say, they feel to me like films that if I had seen them when they came out, I would have hated them.
Yeah.
But watching them now, like 15 years later, the way in which they have dated and the way in which they you know, this disappeared early 2000s hip hop culture is crystallized in these films. It kind of makes them kind of quaint.
Yeah.
Is that they have a quaint, kind of charming quality to them.
Yeah.
In the particular like brand of cool that they try to kind of
yeah, I agree. And that's even
convey.
embodied in the DVD menu. When I don't know if you own it on DVD, but when I was watching it recently again, like you get 3 choices of menus that are based upon the 3 choices of cars from the opening race, or 3 of the 4 from the opening race, and it's like, you know, it's like choosing a car in a video game. And actually, you know, you're just about to watch the same film, so it doesn't matter which menu you choose.
So in February 2004, after the release of Too Fast, Too Furious, Singleton became attached to an adaptation of Luke Cage, again for Columbia. Luke Cage is a Marvel superhero. Most recently, the basis of one of those Netflix series.
Oh,
you haven't watched any of those?
No, I haven't. But so he's not a character in the Marvel expanded.
He is now as part of the Netflix shows. The Netflix shows are technically supposed to be set in the same universe, although they don't.
But how much did they cross over into the film?
As far as I know, they don't cross over at all. They just make reference to. Anyway.
Okay.
They make reference to the same events or whatever, but there's no actual crossover.
Gotcha.
So Luke Cage is a former gang member who's framed for a crime he didn't commit, and while in prison he volunteers for a medical experiment that goes awry and gives him super strength and bulletproof skin, which he uses to become a hero for hire. And Singleton remained attached to that project for years. He wanted Tyrese for the role, and he wanted Terrence Howard for the role of the villain Diamondback. But yeah, he was still attached to it as late as 2007. You know. We'll get to that in a minute, but anyway, in October of 2004, he became attached to his next feature film, Four Brothers.
Everybody put your fucking hands up! Detroit police, I want to see your fucking hands in the air! Every last one of you! Sit your fucking hands! Don't fuck you! Sit the fuck down! Don't fucking move! Sit down! Over here! Oh, yeah, you. Don't get him off that right? Cop. Sit down and shut the fuck up! Yo, what the hell y'all want? Y'all ain't no cops. What the hell you doing here, man?
Watch out with the police when I'm done with him. No. This is not the talking part, okay? This is the listening part, so shut your mouth.
The hell you standing up for?
You know who I am?
It's warm here.
Get your corn muffin head ass over there on the couch.
You don't know why we're here.
Blaze your
What the
ass.
fuck?
Shut up. I know you're not going to tell me what I want to know, so I'm going to light your little bitch ass on fire. Then I'm going to watch you run around here like a chicken with his head cut off, lighting all your little friends on fire. Is that what you want?
Which one of your boys shot up the liquor store on 104th Street? The police got witnesses, bro. Don't even hit us with no bullshit.
Okay, tough guy. Hey! That was the talking part. You better start saying what the fuck I want to hear. Speak.
Man, that shit was counterfeit as a motherfucker, man. Okay, ain't nobody playing no basketball when that shit went down, okay? Why you think cops ain't arrest nobody?
What the hell are they doing?
How do you know nobody was playing basketball if you weren't there?
Cuz, bitch, police said those people wasn't killed till 11 o'clock.
So what?
So they turned the court lights out at 10.
So Four Brothers, a kind of unofficial or, you know, half-acknowledged remake of Henry Hathaway's 1965 Western, The Sons of Katie Elder, features once again Tyrese Gibson as Angel, but also Mark Wahlberg in the lead role as Bobby, Andre Benjamin as Jeremiah, and Garrett Hedlund as Jack. And they are the Mercer brothers, 2 of whom are white, 2 of whom are black, and they were, as the film opens, have been adopted many years previously by a woman who is killed in the sort of opening scene of the film in a convenience store robbery. She falls foul as a kind of collateral damage, or so we're led to believe, in that, and which brings the Four Brothers back for her funeral in Detroit, Michigan, and yeah, so the film is about
they begin
investigation into their mother's murder.
Right.
Which
Okay.
picks up
And we should
momentum
also
as
say
the film goes.
we should also say that the brothers are the mother is a woman who fostered, who we're told cycled lots of children out of the group home foster care system.
Yeah.
And we're one of the cop characters when talking about these four brothers asks, like, why are they such fuck ups if she was such an angel? And we're told that these are the four kids that were so bad that she couldn't find them homes, so she just raised them herself, and that these guys are saints compared to what they would be if it hadn't been for her. You haven't seen the Western that this is based on?
I have not seen the Western, much to my shame, because it has been on my radar for a while now. And it makes me want to see it.
Yeah.
Because Four Brothers, I liked. I think it's a fine movie. So what you thought about Shaft, I'll say with regard to this, although it's a better film than Shaft, I think. It's a more enjoyable film than Shaft.
I think so too,
I think a large part of that is the fact that the central, what could reasonably be in theory a single character, investigating the death of his mother, is turned into four conflicting versions of the same character in a way. It seems strange to say that, but a large part of that's the chemistry that they have, and especially early on, I think, particularly between Mark Wahlberg and Tyrese Gibson, I think, Gibson and Andre Benjamin. So Andre Benjamin is the one who kind of was looking after the mother before the other three had to come back and be brought together by the funeral. And as it turns out, there was foul play at work, and the death wasn't as unplanned.
It was actually a contract killing. It was to do with Andre Benjamin's work, Jeremiah's work as a property developer in the area, and him getting kind of reluctantly tied up with this local gangster.
Yeah.
The mother trying to bring legal proceedings against this gangster. So
yeah. Again, in Singletonian fashion, there's a spiky humour at play here. Almost I'm saying almost a broad comedy at play at kind of questionable moments. I'm not saying like Singleton's wrong to do them, but he does introduce them at moments where you think, well, okay, like the one of their like prime suspects at the point in that film, like when he sets his dogs on Mark Wahlberg's character Bobby, and it kind of played for laughs, and then they end up kind of cutting so the guy is dangling out of the apartment, his own apartment, trying to escape the three brothers because Andre Benjamin Jeremiah is not there yet. Oh, that's at that point. And they end up cutting the rope from which he's dangling, very Home Alone fashion, from a treehouse. And he goes tumbling, to what could have been his death, but isn't. And it's, I mean, I'm not, again, you're not really sure whether to laugh or find the whole thing brutal. Perhaps you're meant to find it both, but it's, it has some moments like that throughout the film, peppered throughout, and you're not really quite sure what to make of it.
Yeah, even in that scene where he sets the dogs on Bobby in the corridor, he sets the dogs, and then Bobby turns with the gun, and he says, "Don't shoot my dog."
Yeah, it's true. And also, like, for half a moment, I also read it like as a comical image of Angel Therese Gibson arriving on the scene and immediately disappearing again because he's seen the dogs. Now, as it turns out, he's gone to get a fire extinguisher. But I do think we're meant to laugh at that point because he just disappears. Yeah. Like, oh fuck this, there's two dogs.
Yeah, I think it's a solid movie. I like that it opens with the mother's death.
Yeah,
I like that they don't try to dramatize the characters' relationships with the mother beforehand. It just opens straight away, and then they reconvene at the funeral. You do get sort of subjective, sort of fantasy visions of the mother at the dinner table. Each of the four brothers seeing the mother saying something to them that she would typically say. which I think is a good choice. Because you could easily have gone the other way with it and front loaded the film with a lot of character exposition that I think is probably unnecessary. Because they do sell the characters' bond with their mother.
Well,
and with each other.
In terms of explanatory or in terms of exposition of the characters, we do have the scene looked on upon by Terrence Howard, who plays Lieutenant Green, who knows the brothers. He knows what they're like, and so he gives a brief explanation to his partner, who figures large in the later elements of the film. He's giving some explanation to him, like who these are and which who's a bad boy and who isn't. And then, as it turns out, the chief villain in the film is Chiwetel Ejiofor, who plays Victor Sweet, who I think gives an excellent performance here. I mean, I'm a big fan of this actor anyway. I think he's great in David Mamet's Red Belt.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Yeah.
And he's a convincing...
Yeah, that's an underrated film too.
Yeah, he's a convincing, venomous hothead here. He has that great scene where he wants an underling to kind of eat like a dog in the restaurant, and then he has another scene in which he sends another character over to the table where children are playing with their games, and he says, "I'm not finished with you yet, and I'm not finished my game of whatever he's playing," and so he sends the guy to sit with his children instead. There are some moments of questionable moments in terms of direction, though, and you mentioned one of the scenes in which it happens. So the Thanksgiving meal, which happens very early on, and Singleton positions his camera in such a way that we see the four brothers at the table enjoying their Thanksgiving ritual. First time they've been brought together for many years. And the camera is positioned, and it's in such a way that it subtly tracks back, and we see the mother's chair, right? And that shows them, and it underlines in a very subtle way, I think, their loss, right, at the same time as it's simultaneously showing their chemistry. And that's it. I got it, and I moved by it. I think it overdoes the pathos, though, by then having them, each of them, kind of recognize the emptiness of the chair and look at it, and then we get the reverse shot of the mother sitting there. It's... yeah, I didn't really need that.
Yeah. What do you think of the chemistry between the four leads?
Yeah, I mean, like Garrett Hedlund, who plays the young one, Jack. He's not an actor I'm familiar with, I must say. Whereas the other three, I've seen him in at least something else each. I mean, the whole point is that there's not. I like the chemistry, I do, and there's a warmth to it, especially early on before things start to go wrong and the proper investigation begins.
Yeah, I mean, even the scenes where where Angel, Tyrese Gibson, walks into the bathroom while Mark Wahlberg is taking a shit, and asks him about some sort of strange anomaly on his penis.
Yeah.
He takes his penis out. He's, I need you to look at something. I think I've got some rust on my tools down there.
Yeah.
And you think it's just the two of them in the bathroom, and then Mark Wahlberg says, "Ask the cockologist in the shower." And Jack is in the shower, and he kind of peers around the shower curtain, and it's pretty funny. Like it's they have a kind of a good rapport, and it's and again, like, it's an unusual scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a solid movie. I don't think it's anything remarkable, but
yeah, I think 70 minutes in, the tense shootout, where again similar to Rosewood in a way, where they're all kind of they're in their home and they can't get out because they're surrounded by armed gunmen who are much more heavily equipped than they are to deal with.
Yeah.
And I think Singleton's direction in that scene's very good. The way he sort of blocks the choreography of what they need to do to kind of reach certain villains outside of certain henchmen outside of the house, and what they need to do and where they need to go and what's happening and where it all is.
One of those scenes where one of those sequences where if it's done right, you don't really get any praise for it. But if you do it wrong, it's so obvious. Like suddenly you don't know where the person shooting is relative to the person being shot at or something like that. It really like heavy logistics and something like that.
Like one thing I was going to say though, and similar to Poetic Justice, is that arguably similar to Boyz N the Hood, right? is that the death of young Jack, which happens at the very end of that 10 shootout, doesn't really have any sort of emotional consequence, and the catharsis that we feel at the end of the film doesn't really. I mean, Boyz N the Hood has a certain tragedy, of course, written into its very ending, and it's bittersweet in a way. This one, I don't feel moved at all by his death, and actually, I was thinking, would I have been moved by any of their deaths? And actually, I don't think I would have.
No.
And so it's not just because that he's the weak link. I just don't think I would. And same with Justice and Poetic Justice 5 hours ago when we were talking about that. It's Q-Tip's death, and that doesn't really play like any sort of emotional role in her further development. But that's a minor qualm in a film that is sold as an action movie.
Are you saying that that's true of Ricky's death in Boyz N the Hood as well?
After that scene in which he's carried onto the sofa, yes. And it could be argued that it's justified because, the boys get swept up in the idea of vengeance, and then, whatever else happens takes kind of a narrative initiative. But yeah, I do think that it does leave me a little cold at the end. Although the death itself moves me.
Yeah, I do think. I can see that in even in Ice Cube's performance after that. I think his conversation with Trey on the stoop at the end. Right before he walks off and fades away. I think you can feel that heaviness. But I agree with you in relation to Poetic Justice and Four Brothers. I don't think it's. In fact, in Four Brothers, it doesn't even. At least in Poetic Justice, it functions as a plot device. In Four Brothers, you could just as well not have Jack die.
Yeah. I agree.
Because they already are seeking revenge for the death of their mother anyway. So.
Yeah. One more thing, I was very surprised and very pleased, I must say, to hear in this film Inner City Blues by Marvin Gaye, one of the many Marvin Gaye songs used here, because this precedes Zodiac by 2 years. And I thought the use of it in Fincher's Zodiac was like amazing. The scene I'm talking about when the building's getting made in the time lapse.
Oh yeah.
And Inner City Blues is playing, and I thought, oh wow, what a genius moment. And actually, here we are, John Singleton using it here before Fincher did. Although it's a very different sequence.
So are you saying Four Brothers is a better film than Zodiac?
Yes, and I also like the fact that the film ends with brothers going to work it out, Willie Hutch, which is great.
Okay, so around the same time that he was directing Four Brothers, he also not only produced but financed out of pocket Craig Brewer's hip hop drama starring Terrence Howard, Hustle and Flow. Because no other studio would pick it up, he financed it himself, which is a film that I have never seen in full. I've seen it and I've seen a lot of different parts of it, and it's a film that I've always kind of meant to get around to watching. But I've always liked what I've seen. Have you seen any of it?
I haven't, no.
He plays a Memphis pimp who decides to embark on a hip hop career, and it's a very kind of very low key, kind of aspirational story. It's as I say, I haven't seen the whole thing, but I've seen quite a bit of it, and I must get around to watching it. And right on the heels of that, he produced Brewer's next film, Black Snake Moan, with Samuel L. Jackson and Christina Ricci, which came out when I was in my first year of college. And I remember the billboards and the posters everywhere, which were really, very strongly evoking both blaxploitation tropes and sexploitation tropes. The posters that I'm talking about with Samuel L. Jackson holding a chain attached to, like, wrapped around Christina Ricci, a scantily clad Christina Ricci. Really, really leaning into this kind of like transgressive, taboo kind of subject matter. Like you're gonna take this very sensitive subject matter and just kind of like stomp around all over it.
Yeah.
But apparently the film is not like that. I've never seen it. Apparently they kind of it was kind of misleading marketing.
Everything is hotter down south was the tagline on the one sheets.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Image. Yeah.
Another one that I've meant to see. Apparently Samuel L. Jackson is great in it. Also in 2007, he produced the debut feature by Frank Reyes, Illegal Tender, which is a crime thriller. But in terms of his own directorial projects that he was developing in this period, in July of 2007, he became attached to direct, or was approached to direct rather, Black Panther for Marvel Studios. This was Black Panther was one of the 10 characters that Marvel owned, having sold off a lot of their more high-profile characters to other studios in the 90s when they were going bankrupt. But when they started, when Marvel Studios started producing their own films in 2005, Black Panther was one of the 10 projects that they initially, were developing. And Singleton was one of the first people approached to do that. And at this point, he was still attached to do Luke Cage for them, and it was expressed as a choice. He could either do Black Panther or Luke Cage. Obviously, he ended up doing neither. In August of 2007, he was attached to a drama called Tulia for Lionsgate, which was going to star Billy Bob Thornton and Halle Berry. He took the project over from Carl Franklin, and this was an adaptation of a book by a writer named Nate Blakesley. The book was called Tulia: Race, Cocaine, and Corruption in a Small Texas Town, and this was a true account of a rash of spurious drug arrests that didn't ultimately produce any drugs or money, but for which 10% of the town's black population was incarcerated, and which was at the time denounced as a very egregious example of racial profiling. That ultimately was not made. Later that year, he was attached to direct a horror film for Relativity called Executive Order 6, which was about the residents of a small snowbound town who have to band together to fight a mysterious horror that turns out to be an alien being that's been unleashed by a plane crash.
Yeah, I mean, Tulia sounds better, but I'm sure you would disagree.
Yes. They both sound pretty interesting to me. The following month, he was attached to direct the A-Team for 20th Century Fox. He had Ice Cube in mind for the B.A. Baracus role. And the story was going to be given a modern twist involving oil tycoons and laser technology. And Joe Carnahan took that film over in January of 2009. Did you see that remake?
I didn't know, but I feel like instinctively, without having seen it, I think Singleton would have been my preferred director of those two if it was between him and Carnahan.
Right.
But I've only ever seen Narc though, so.
Okay. See, I hated the A-Team. I loved the show when I was a kid. I hated the film.
Yeah, me too.
And I've seen Narc, and Narc is good, and but it's actually The Grey, the film that he made after the A-Team. I loved The Grey.
Yeah.
So he's kind of hit and miss, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested. It would have been interesting to see what Singleton would have done with that. So in May of 2009, Singleton was attached to direct a film called The Wheelman for Paramount, which was going to star Vin Diesel. And this was an adaptation of the Ubisoft video game Wheelman, which is about an expert driver who comes out of retirement to protect a woman from his past. But that piqued your interest, yeah?
Yes. Yes, it does. What happened to it?
It didn't get made. I guess it's the production was contingent on the success of the game. I don't know. Anyway, his next project ended up being Abduction.
Who are you, really?
I'm one of your keepers, Nathan. I'm put in place to look after you. It's the arrangement I made with your father in case something like this ever happened.
This is crazy. Call the police or something.
I already tried.
She has heard too much already.
What?
Are you serious?
As soon as you can, dump those clothes.
Don't lose that kid.
Now, in less than 20 seconds, we're going to hit a soft curve before the bridge. I'm going to slow down just enough for you to jump out.
Jump?
It's 30 feet down to the river.
Dr. Bennett, this is insane.
15 seconds. And remember, from now on, do not trust anybody.
I need answers.
You've been looking for answers your whole life. You just didn't know what questions to ask. Now you have 10 seconds to open that door.
I don't know if I can handle this.
5 seconds. Leave the girl. You're better off alone.
Where am I supposed to go?
Take a breath.
Jump!
It's gonna be okay.
Now!
Okay, so this is the story of a high school kid who is given an assignment to write a report about missing persons websites. Happens across a picture of himself on the website and is pulled into a high-octane conspiracy chase story And what did you make of this one?
Well, I mean, going by that synopsis, I found it a lot more bonkers than it's apparently intended. I mean, it's obviously, you know, Nathan Price, played by Taylor Lautner, it's obviously set up to cash in on his, you know, Twilight fame and popularity.
Right.
And it's positioned in such a way that I think they were hoping that it would lead to another kind of Bourne franchise, frankly, maybe for younger audiences.
Bourne Identity kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like a YA, yeah, exactly, a kind of a YA Bourne Identity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree. And in many ways, it fulfills that, other than the fact that it's not very good. You know, it begins as one film, it ends as another, and you know, in between there, it does whatever it wants, and you kind of just have to go with it. I mean, I think it's an opportunity missed, I must say, because even like with a film as crazily rug pully like this, there's potential there for a great number of sequels and whatnot, right? And as soon as he begins to figure out that he's not who he thought he was, and that his upbringing and everything was a whole kind of elaborate pretense set up by the CIA, that's obviously a silly synopsis, a silly premise. It can go places. It's let down badly. But where to begin with what it's let down badly? Did you like it?
No, but what I would say is it's not the. I mean, it's easy to dismiss these kinds of films as like preposterous.
Yeah.
But the premise of this film is no more preposterous than you know, some of the high concept paranoid thrillers that Liam Neeson has starred in the past few years, like Non-Stop or Unknown, which both of which I pretty much enjoyed. But
or even the Bourne films, you know.
Yeah, they're not quite as high concept. Okay. They're more grounded than this or the Liam Neeson ones. But like, okay, so do you think that if you swapped out Taylor Lautner and is it Lily Collins for leads that had some chemistry and some charisma and some acting chops, do you think to me that they are the rocks that this film perishes on?
Mm-hmm.
And like if you put charismatic characters in the center of it, it would be okay. But as it is, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, and I mean, like as I said, I think a lot of people were just assuming that Lautner was going to be this default star. Like it just all you had to do was put him in a film and it was going to make money. And I mean, it was obvious from the Twilight films, some of which I've seen, that the guy just sadly he can't act. I mean, I was watching it. I mean, you kind of feel sorry for him in this. He's just so out of his depth.
Yeah.
Singleton can't really do anything with him. I mean, the script's bad, but I mean, its dialogue could very easily be a charming kind of like comedy thing, where it's just so outlandish. I mean, like there are websites dedicated to this, I'm sure, but that one, the line. I mean, he has a friend who specializes in fake IDs because he can't do anything else, of course, and who they somehow let on their sports team, even though he can't do any sports either. But I mean, in the first scene when he arrives at the party and the friend's like, "Hey, that was exciting! Wow, let's go get drunk." I mean, it's like lines like that. If they're delivered in such a way, it becomes this gigantically enjoyable film to sit through, and yet this isn't. I mean, you've got Jason Isaacs and Maria Bello as his parents, and it's obvious even before it gets like outlandish in terms of concept. I mean, his first scene with Jason Isaacs, where he's kind of being punished for getting drunk. I mean, I was watching this not really knowing what the premise of the film was or the synopsis, right? So I had no idea where it was going to go, and I'm just thinking, well, this is obviously like an extremely silly film. I mean, like with Maria Bello looking on him.
So they're sparring. They're sparring in the garden.
Yeah.
They're sparring in the garden, and the sparring kind of escalates into like more of a full-blooded fight. But I mean, like that's also the Taylor Lautner's interactions with Maria Bello, particularly when he confronts her about
honestly.
not being. He asks, are you really my mother? And like Maria Bello is like such a good actor, and she's really trying to sell it and getting nothing from Taylor Lautner. I mean, he's just like this blank face, empty vessel.
But that scene does lead to arguably the best action sequence in the film. I mean, Maria Bello, fighting off two ninja dressed sort of bad guys in their sort of lounge area of the house.
Very surprising, because you've seen that Jason Isaacs has some sort of combat ability, but you don't expect it to come from Maria Bello.
True, yeah.
And I don't think I've ever seen Maria Bello in any sort of role like that before. No. So it was very surprising and entertaining.
Anyway, so she's dispatched early, sadly, because she's one of the better things in the film. And then
I was very sad when she was killed, actually.
Also Singleton includes weird shots of like that linger on her body, and then the reaction shots of Lautner kind of trying to come to grips with the fact he's just witnessed his mother kill. And I actually thought, well, she's obviously alive. She's obviously going to get up here because he's including these shots, and then she doesn't. And then Lautner, so Lautner's kind of in a rage and a fury, and he starts to beat the henchman up. Who are you? Whatever. And the henchman says, and it's the best line in the film, "I have something to tell you." Or I think that's what he says. "I won't die here. I have something to tell you. There's a bomb in the oven." Which leads Karen, Lily Collins, and Nathan to go to the oven, open it, and there's a bomb there. The light on the oven obviously goes on, and there's a bomb there with a very helpful device on it attached that tells them that they've got 7 seconds in which to get out of the house.
Yeah.
It's preposterous.
Who put
from that point
who put
on.
The bomb there? It's the man who invaded the house. We're supposed to have put the bomb there.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess so.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you leave a chicken in an oven,
why did they only give themselves? Why did they only give themselves a few seconds? Yeah, I mean, see, the thing is, that's the point at which I thought this is like one of the crazier Liam Neeson thrillers.
Yeah.
But and at that point and throughout that whole sequence, I was kind of thinking, okay, this is what we're in for here is an entertainingly ludicrous conspiracy thriller.
Yeah.
With two really, really boring cardboard leads. And it's a pity that we have to, because that's why I was sad when Maria Bello died. I was like, oh, come on. Now we're just with Taylor Lautner and Lily Collins.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, look at
it's I mean, every scene between them, every dramatic scene, when they're working on they're supposed to have had this kind of on and off relationship or something in the past, and when they were younger, and it feels like a terrible teen TV drama. Like the scene where she's at the laptop and he comes and stands beside her, and there's a shot of her arm brushing off his arm, and what am I watching here? And yeah, it does seem to be as you were saying, the YA Bourne Identity as the elevator pitch. We can do the Bourne Identity for the Twilight fan base.
Yeah.
And the romance is in there, and it's very kind of Twilight style romance. Very syrupy as well. Yeah, I mean, you said that's the funniest line in the film, but I have to disagree.
Okay.
The funniest line in the film is when they go from there to the hospital, and then Sigourney Weaver, who is his therapist, who we've seen earlier in the film, who helps him to deal with his rage issues. She is also, it turns out, a CIA agent assigned to protect him, and she comes to the hospital to rescue them, and to rescue them, she brings in a big bouquet of balloons to kind of obscure them as they move through the corridors, and then they get into the car park, and she releases the bouquet of balloons to obscure the CCTV camera, and then says, "I hate balloons."
Oh, there's another line also later on. I mean, we could do a whole Habitus special. Maybe our Christmas special will just be dedicated to Abduction dialogue. But so the chief villain here, the nemesis, is played by Michael Nyqvist, sadly no longer with us, as Nikolai Kozlov, and he's on the phone to Taylor Lautner at one point, and he's trying to threaten him because Taylor has Taylor. I'm calling him by his first name. Taylor Lautner has Nathan. That's what he's called. Stephen Price, Nathan Harper. It turns out that he has already the information and device that Nikolai Kozlov is is in pursuit of, and he's on the phone, and he says, "You better give me the device, blah blah blah, or if you don't, you will be responsible for the death of every friend you have on Facebook." Which which completely dates the film immediately to a certain age. I mean, it's
this was written in like 2009. And this is like when Facebook was just becoming a phenomenon.
But I wonder, in making this film, I mean, I'm sure Singleton looks back at it and thinks, whatever else it might have gone wrong with it. I mean, like you got to look at the two leads and just think, I mean, that was a mistake.
This sinks the film completely. Yeah,
I'm sure you had no authority over.
You don't launch your career. No, this was packaged as a Taylor Lautner Bourne movie. I'm sure, but like you don't relaunch your career on the basis of a film starring Taylor Lautner.
It's true, and
he's not. You're not gonna be the guy who directed Taylor Lautner to a star-making role. No one's going to be that guy.
But I wonder what, so we've got Alfred Molina in this film. You've mentioned Sigourney Weaver. We've
who
mentioned
lives in
Jason
the
Isaacs and
Alfred Molina lives in the exposition room.
Yeah.
Where men stand around and explain the plot to each other, which is a feature of these types of films. It's a feature of the Bourne films too.
Yeah, no, true.
It's not as egregious in those films, but it's.
I mean, Greengrass uses it in United '93 even. Going to the control room in a very obviously
that's true.
It's not justified, but it's. I just wondered watching this, like, what must have you've mentioned that scene with Maria Bello, but like, what must have Jason Isaacs have been thinking, to himself, like, these are heavyweights in comparison, and they know exactly what to do, and they're playing it in such the correct way, like.
But it's almost like they're there to offset the deficiencies of Taylor Lautner and Lily Collins. I don't even know Lily Collins. Like it really is Taylor Lautner for me. That's just like the film is just a non-starter. I also thought it was hilarious. Right after the scene where they escape using the balloons, they're involved in a high-speed pursuit down the highway, and Sigourney Weaver tells Taylor Lautner that. There's a soft bend coming up, and that she's going to slow down just enough, so that they can jump and roll out of the car. So open the door, and you've
got 10 seconds to get out.
You got 10 seconds, and they open the door ready to jump when she slows down just enough, and instead she swerves to a complete stop, and they just fly out the door, and then she peels away. So she could have just stopped and let them out.
Yeah.
I thought that was absolutely hilarious.
It's weird, Lily Jane Collins is Phil Collins' daughter. As well.
Oh really?
Yeah. So wasn't like. I mean, I haven't seen her in anything else. I hadn't seen her in anything before this or after, or she was in The Blind Side.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, she played Sandra Bullock's daughter in that. I didn't see it either, but she was in that.
Right.
There's that from Rush Hour.
You're
sorry. Continue.
Yeah, you're certainly right about the intention of like launching this Bourne thing, because when he has his conversation with his father, I believe played by Dermot Mulroney, but you don't see his face, so it's like, oh, we're saving that for the sequel. We're gonna he's gonna have further, like his father's always gonna be watching over him, and like eventually we'll give you the emotional catharsis of like the reunion.
Yeah, indeed.
Let me ask you this: why is the film called Abduction?
Well, that's what. So going into it, as I said, without any synopsis, I was thinking, well, obviously, like Karen, Lily Collins is going to get abducted or kidnapped, and he's going to have to go running after her, like, or something like that.
Oh, really? Yeah. I didn't assume that. I assumed, because I knew about him discovering a picture of himself on the missing persons website. So I thought that he had been abducted as a child but
Jason
no one.
Isaacson, yeah.
No, well, not necessarily. I thought I didn't know what would come of that, but I thought that he was the abductee.
Yeah. Okay.
And I still don't understand why it's called Abduction.
Yeah, I don't either.
It does nobody is abducted in the film. I mean, the only reason that I can think of is that initially when he discovers himself on the website, that's the thought that comes to mind. But it didn't come to mind for you, so I don't know. It's not.
Yeah, no, it's extremely strange.
It's a peculiar title.
And I actually think a title can make a film. And it can certainly ruin one. And I mean, obviously, the title in this film is the least of its problems. But had it had a more sort of coherent one, or a more sort of justified one, or a clear cut one, then maybe I'd be able to cut it some slack. But what did you think of like?
And to what? To what extent do you think the film has camp value?
See, that's another thing. Like, Lautner isn't expressive enough for that to become that for me. It's not like, you know,
that's
there's
true,
that cliche of like it's so bad it's good. I don't think it is like that. I don't think we have that kind of
it has a few
kitschy
moments.
charm. Yeah.
I think the two moments that I mentioned, the I'll slow down just enough and then peeling to, like coming to a complete stop, and all that kind of stuff is you know, unintentionally hilarious, and but I agree with you that Lautner is just he just completely torpedoes the film.
I mean, those moments are, you know, that moment there what you mentioned, and it is hilarious, but it, you know, it's Sigourney Weaver knowing like this is absolute like fluff material, and I'm going to play it as such. You know? Even this,
exactly.
Even the scene on the train, like the action sequence on the train, like it's, you know, it's a From Russia with Love reference. It's a homage to the, you know, the greatest action scene arguably in the whole Bond franchise. You know, it's just, it doesn't, like, you know, Singleton's directions there. He does all the, you know, he does all the blocking. So like Karen Murphy goes to, that's another thing. So they're getting down to business, you know, finally having a kiss, their first kiss since middle school, and she's like, "Oh yeah, that was good, that was much better." Right. And then all of a sudden she's like, "Yeah, I need to eat. I'm really hungry." And I'm like, "Sorry, what?" Like, this is, I realize like you're trying to market this at kids, and like you could do it in a tongue-in-cheek way, like, okay, you know, they're not actually going to go any further than that. But it just because the chemistry's not there, and because like the tongue-in-cheek humor's not there, and then, you know, Karen's going to the food cart, and she's talking to herself like, "Oh, maybe he'll like a cake. I'll get a cake or whatever."
Yeah.
And then obviously like the henchman comes in, and, you know, they have a fight and whatever on the train. It's not there. Like, you know, he's just not convincing. Even like as an action sequences where you're not. It's like, and I get that they use body doubles and whatnot, but like even, you know, a great physical performer, which, you know, let's say Matt Damon is, or someone like Tom Cruise, right? Like a great performer will give a director potential to, you know, utilize different shots, you know, like show us them doing certain things and whatever else. And he's not able to do that. You know, it even limits the director's vocabulary here. It's such a shame. It's, as I said, it's an opportunity missed.
Is it Singleton's worst film?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so in the wake of the roaring success of Abduction, Singleton was attached to in October of 2011 he became attached to the Tupac biopic, which was going by the name Tupac at the time, ultimately released as All Eyes on Me earlier this year. Did you see that?
I didn't. I think it was the opening film of the East End Film Festival in London, the same festival at which my most recent film premiered. But I wasn't in town for it, unfortunately. Although, to be honest, it wasn't received too well.
No, it got very bad reviews.
Did you see it?
No, I was kind of interested in it, but before the reviews came out.
Yeah.
You know, because I enjoyed Straight Outta Compton last year. I thought that, or it was 2 years ago actually.
Yeah.
But I thought that was well made. Anyway.
Were you surprised by Straight Outta Compton being so good? Because I approach those kinds of biopics with a certain trepidation, I must say.
Yeah, I mean, it's easily criticizable, but it's entertaining.
Okay.
Certainly the first half of the film when they're still a unit. You know, once they break up and you're following 3 different storylines, it starts to feel a little bit like hitting these kind of like necessary beats where, you know, oh, they're recording this particular song and now here's Ice Cube writing the Friday screenplay and this kind of thing. It's like a scene to represent each kind of like seminal moment in their careers, and you're following 3 different storylines, so it gets a little bit disjointed and kind of lurches from scene to scene. But
so let's say it was a bullet dodged in terms of Singleton not finally being attached to.
Well, that's the interesting thing, because it's a bit of a rocky road here. So he was attached in October of 2011. He had been a front runner to direct Straight Outta Compton, but had opted for the Tupac biopic over it, which he took over from Antoine Fuqua, who had trouble casting the film, had trouble finding somebody to play Tupac. So he took over in October, November of 2011. but he left over creative differences in 2012. There were lawsuits suing and countersuing between the producers and Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mother. He left in 2012, but he came back in 2014 and started developing it again, started rewriting it again. But then he left the project again in April of 2015, and Carl Franklin took over. So Carl Franklin and John Singleton historically seem to kind of orbit a lot of the same projects.
Yeah.
And then eventually Carl Franklin left the project as well, and the final director, Benny Boom, the music video director, took over in late 2015, and he ended up making the film. But when he left in 2015, Singleton said, "The reason I'm not making this picture is that the people involved aren't really respectful of Tupac Amaru Shakur." Although the producers and members of Tupac's old group, the Outlaws, said that allegedly Singleton was actually fired for trying to include scenes in which it's implied that Tupac was raped in jail, and that Afeni was a lesbian.
Okay.
Which Singleton maintains that these things are true, and that he wanted to do the kind of unvarnished Tupac biopic, but that the people involved says they're not respectful of Tupac's legacy. They don't want to tell the truth about him. He says that he still intends to make his own Tupac biopic at some point.
It's interesting that, because I can't immediately recall another director kind of wanting to make a dramatization of a person's life when he has actually been creatively involved with that person. I can't really think. But presumably his own project would also be fictional, if not go down the non-fiction route. Like, I'm reminded of Nick Broomfield's Whitney Houston film.
How do you mean?
Can I Be Me, earlier this year? What do you mean? Sorry.
How do you mean fiction?
So dramatization of his life with an actual cast rather than a documentary.
Oh no, yeah, approach. Sure, yeah. Because they were talking about doing a biopic in their early 2000s, I think. But they ran into these problems of representation and casting, and they decided to not do it and to do that documentary Tupac Resurrection instead, which came out in 2002, and I think it won an Oscar.
It might be more profitable for him to go down the Gus Van Sant Last Days route. So it's like Tupac, but not Tupac, and then circumvent any sort of legal issues that way, maybe.
I don't know. I don't get the impression that it was legal issues that got him booted off the project. It was just that this is not something that's not a part of his life that he wanted, that the producers wanted to represent. But also, Steve McQueen is making another documentary about Tupac.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, no, Singleton's film would definitely be a drama. Pretty unlikely that it will get made, but anyway. In this period, there aren't a lot of other film projects that so it's 6 years since Abduction came out, and it really does seem to be that the Tupac film was the only thing that he was kind of consistently involved in, because he spent most of his time working in television. Primarily with the shows Rebel and his own show Snowfall, which you watched the pilot episode for.
Watching the pilot is too strong a statement. I was aware that it was premiering, I think, on BBC last week at the time of recording. I watched the first 15 minutes out of curiosity, basically, and it details the emergence of cocaine in South Central Los Angeles in the 1980s, and so it's very much returning to material and geography that he kind of made a name for himself for. It was too flashy and fast for my liking. It just seemed very sort of just not very good to not good enough to sort of get the kind of critical momentum that a show like that I think needs in order for it to become big by the time it gets to the UK. And it was just like, whatever. I mean, obviously, that's that's not intended in any way to be a reflection, a critical assessment of the show itself, but just judging by those 15 minutes, I wasn't really interested in seeing any more.
Right. Okay, so thank you for listening to our second installment in our ongoing Journeymen series. Please follow us on Twitter at habituspod. My name is Bobby Lowe. I'm here with
Michael Pattison.
And thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you. Cheers.